Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving back from a job outside Syracuse when this happened. It was early November, one of those cold nights where the rain never fully committed to being rain or snow. Just wet mist blowing sideways across the windshield and collecting on the shoulders of the road. I'd been working late at a warehouse, installing security cameras, and by the time I packed up my tools, it was after 11. I could have stayed at a motel, but I only lived about 2 hours away and figured I'd rather sleep in my own bed. The route my GPS picked took me off the main highway for a while because of construction. I ended up on an old state road that cut through a stretch of woods and closed businesses. I knew the area vaguely, but not well. There were old diners, empty gas stations, a couple of shuttered motels from when that road used to matter more. Traffic was almost non-existent. Every once in a while, a pickup came the other way, but mostly it was just my headlights, the wet road, and my wipers squeaking every few seconds. Around 12:20, I passed a sign for an old toll road museum or something like that. I didn't read it closely. The GPS had me staying straight for another 14 miles. A few minutes later, I saw the toll booth. It sat in the middle of the road like something nobody knew what to do with after the road changed. 2 lanes split around it, though one lane was blocked with orange barrels and a faded sign that said closed to traffic. The booth itself looked abandoned. Small concrete island. Flat roof, narrow windows, peeling green paint. The old arm gate was gone, but the metal post for it still leaned beside the curb. I slowed down automatically because the road narrowed around it. That's when I noticed the light inside. Pale white, not yellow like an old bulb, not blue like fluorescent. Just this dull white glow filling the little booth from inside. It was strange because everything else around it looked dead. No power lines running visibly to the booth. No working streetlights nearby, no other buildings with lights on. I remember leaning forward over the steering wheel while approaching, trying to see if maybe there was some maintenance worker inside. But the booth looked empty. No person, no equipment, just that pale light through dirty glass. Then my radio cut to static, instantly. 1 second it was some late night talk show with 2 guys arguing about hockey, and the next it became loud, flat static. Not fading in and out like normal bad reception. It hit all at once. I turned the volume down fast. The static stayed sharp, even low. The toll booth light seemed brighter as I rolled closer. I dropped to maybe 15 miles an hour. My headlights swept across the side window of the booth, and for a second I saw something on the glass. Not a reflection exactly, more like condensation moving from the inside. The whole window looked fogged over, even though the booth should have been cold and empty. Then the pale light inside shifted, not turned off, not flickered, shifted, like something standing in front of it had moved just out of sight. I stared into the booth as I passed. The inside was completely bare, old stool tipped sideways, empty counter, dust on everything. But for one quick moment, right as my driver's window lined up with the booth window, I saw a dark shape low behind the counter. Not clearly, just enough to make my body react before my brain understood it. I hit the gas. The car lurched forward through the narrow lane. The radio static got louder even though I hadn't touched the knob. I looked in the rearview mirror. The booth was dark. No pale glow. Nothing. It sat behind me like any other abandoned roadside structure, swallowed by the dark and rain. But the static kept going. That bothered me more than the light going out. I expected reception to come back once I drove past. Instead, the static stayed with me. Harsh and even, like I was still right beside whatever caused it. I kept driving. The road ahead curved through thick trees, no houses, no lights. The mist made my headlights look weak, like they could only reach a few yards before being eaten by gray air. I glanced down at the radio screen. The station numbers were gone, not reset to 0, not blank exactly. The screen showed a row of short lines where the digits should have been. I pressed the power button. Nothing happened. The static continued. I held it down longer. Still nothing. That was when I smelled something weird in the car. Wet concrete. That was the first thing my brain gave me. Wet concrete and warm dust, like an old basement with an electrical heater running somewhere. It didn't smell like burning wires, but close enough that I looked at the dashboard for smoke. Nothing. The heat was on low, engine temperature normal. I cracked the driver's window, thinking maybe the smell came from the vents. Cold, wet air pushed in. The smell got stronger. I shut the window. The static popped loudly once. Then a voice came through. Not a clear voice, just a piece of one buried under the hiss. It sounded like someone saying a word from another room with their mouth too close to a microphone. I froze with one hand still near the radio. Then it happened again. A low voice. Male, maybe. Or just low because the sound was distorted. It said something like, "Wait." I'm not saying that's definitely what it said. That's just what I heard. I checked the mirror again. Nothing behind me. No headlights. No toll booth anymore. The road curved too much to see it. I looked forward, and there was a pale glow ahead between the trees. Same color as the booth light. Soft white, low to the ground. For 1 second, I thought I was coming up on another car around the bend, maybe pulled off with its headlights pointed at the woods. But it wasn't on the road. It hung off to the right, back among the tree trunks. I slowed before I meant to. The glow stayed in place as I rolled closer. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate the forest properly. The trees near it only had thin, pale edges, while the ground beneath stayed dark. The radio static became quieter, not gone, just lower, like it had moved farther away. I passed the spot where I'd seen the glow. Nothing was there, just wet leaves, brush, and black tree trunks. The static surged again behind the dashboard. A sudden pressure built in my ears, like driving up a steep hill too fast. I swallowed hard. My ears popped, but the pressure stayed. Then the car lights dimmed. Not completely. Just enough that the road ahead turned murky. The engine kept running, but it sounded muffled. My tires on the wet pavement sounded muffled too. Everything did. It was like someone put thick walls around the car. I remember gripping the wheel with both hands and telling myself out loud, "Keep driving. Just keep driving." Then something tapped the passenger window. One soft tap. I nearly jerked the wheel. The passenger side faced the woods. There was no shoulder there, just ditch and trees. Another tap came. Higher this time. Not thrown gravel, not rain. A careful fingertip sound. I didn't look right away. I kept staring at the center line because I had this stupid fear that if I looked, I'd see someone sitting beside the car, keeping pace outside. Then the tap came again, closer to the rear window. I looked. Nothing there. The glass was fogged slightly from the outside. A narrow streak had formed across it, like something damp dragged along the window while the car was moving. I hit the windshield wipers, even though that didn't help the side window. The wipers scraped across the glass, and for a split second, the road ahead looked different, wider. Not the same road. The lane markings disappeared, and both sides opened into flat, empty pavement, stretching out under the mist. Then the wipers completed their pass, and the two-lane road returned. I slammed the brakes. The car skidded slightly on wet leaves and stopped crooked across the lane. The static continued quietly. I sat there breathing hard, staring through the windshield. The road was normal, narrow, dark, trees close on both sides. I checked the clock. 12:31. That didn't seem right. I'd passed the booth at 12:24, maybe 12:25. It felt like at least 15 minutes had passed, maybe more. I put the car in park and rubbed my face with both hands. That was when I noticed something on the hood. Fine droplets, not rain. The mist outside was wet, sure, but these drops were thicker and pale. They clung to the hood in little white specks, almost like diluted paint or road salt. But it was too early for road salt. And I hadn't passed any plows. The drops were also arranged strangely. 3 curved lines across the hood, starting near the windshield and sweeping toward the passenger headlight, like something wet had rested there. I put the car back in drive immediately. The tires spun for a second before catching. The radio static suddenly stopped. Complete silence filled the car. Then the radio came back on to the same talk show mid-sentence. The host was laughing, normal reception, normal dashboard screen. The station number displayed correctly. I checked the clock again. 12:31. Still. The road opened up about a mile later near an old rest area. I pulled in because my hands were shaking too much to keep driving. The rest area was closed, just a small paved loop with a boarded-up bathroom building and a row of picnic tables. One yellow street lamp flickered near the entrance. I parked under it and got out. The cold air felt real in a way the car hadn't for those few minutes. Wind moved the trees. Rain misted against my face. Somewhere far off, a truck engine rumbled along a bigger road. I walked around to the passenger side. The window had a long smear across it, not from my hand. Outside. It started near the front, crossed the glass, and ended near the rear door. The smear looked wet and chalky. When I touched it, it left fine white grit on my fingers. It smelled like wet concrete. I checked the hood next. The pale droplets were still there, tiny white beads scattered in those curved lines. Some had dried already into powder. I looked toward the tree line around the rest area and saw the toll booth. At least I thought I did. It stood maybe 50 yards away behind a row of bushes. Small square structure, pale white light glowing in the window. My stomach dropped so hard I actually backed into the car. There was no toll booth at that rest area. I knew that. It made no sense for it to be there. I blinked and it was gone. Just the boarded bathroom building with one dark window. I stood there staring until my eyes watered. Then the yellow street lamp above me went out. Everything dropped into darkness except my car lights. The radio inside the car cut to static again, loud enough that I heard it through the closed doors. I ran around, got in, locked the doors, and threw the car into reverse. The street lamp came back on just as I backed out. In that flash of yellow light, I saw a shape standing beside the boarded-up bathroom. Tall, still, facing my direction. Then the lights steadied, and there was nobody there. I drove out of the rest area so fast the tires threw gravel. The static stayed with me again. Another mile, maybe more. I kept one hand on the wheel and one hand pressed over the radio knob, like that would help somehow. It didn't. The static pulsed softer and softer, louder, almost like breathing. Then it faded on its own. The talk show returned, but not where it should have been. The same host was now talking about weather delays near Albany. When I reached the next town, a little place with one gas station still open, I pulled in under the brightest pump lights I could find. My clock said 1:08. That made no sense at all. The drive from the booth to that gas station should have been maybe 20 minutes. I went inside mostly because I wanted to stand near another person. The clerk was a woman about my age with short black hair and a hoodie under her work vest. Her name tag said Maribel. She looked up from her phone and said, "Rough night?" I guess my face looked bad. I asked if there used to be a toll booth back down the road. She stared at me for a second. "Old county booth?" "Yeah. They blocked that road off years ago." I told her I just passed it. She shook her head. "You couldn't have. That section's closed after the washout." I said the GPS sent me that way. She frowned and pointed out the front window toward the road I'd come in on. "From there?" I nodded. She said, "That road comes from the highway now. It doesn't pass the booth." I didn't argue with her. I just bought coffee I didn't drink and went back outside. Under the gas station lights, I checked the car again. The passenger window smear was still there, but now I noticed smaller marks above it on the roof. Little pale circles arranged in a line, each about the size of a quarter. The hood powder had dried completely. I wiped some onto a napkin and folded it into my glove box without knowing why. Then I saw the back seat. My tool bag sat open. I never left it open because screws and bits spilled everywhere. Inside, my black electrical tape roll had been cut cleanly in half. Not torn, cut. The missing half wasn't in the bag, and on the fabric seat beside it was a single wet streak of pale grit, the same stuff from outside. I got home around 3 in the morning. I didn't unload the tools until daylight. When I finally did, I found mud on the bottom of the passenger seat. Not floor mat mud. Seat mud. A small patch of wet dirt pressed into the fabric where nobody had been sitting. It smelled like concrete dust and rain. Mixed into it were tiny white fragments, thin and brittle, like flakes of old paint. I brushed them into the driveway and watched them dissolve almost instantly in the damp air. I was driving home through southern Missouri after a bad storm when this happened. It was one of those late spring nights where the rain stopped, but everything kept dripping for hours afterward. Trees, power lines, gutters, all of it. The air felt wet enough that my shirt stuck to my back even inside the truck. I'd been at my cousin Ray's place, helping him patch a section of roof that started leaking during the storm. By the time we finished, it was almost midnight. He told me to stay over because half the county roads around there flooded whenever creeks jumped their banks, but I had work early and figured I could make it if I took it slow. I drove an old Ford Ranger then. Nothing fancy, but it sat high enough that I wasn't too worried about shallow water. The route home cut through farmland and wooded low spots. No streetlights, just narrow lanes, ditches full of brown runoff, and fence posts leaning in the dark. At first, everything was normal. Wet blacktop, frogs screaming from flooded fields, branches down along the shoulder. My wipers squeaking, even though the rain had mostly stopped. About 20 minutes after leaving Ray's, I turned onto Harlow Lane, which was a shortcut through the bottoms. I knew that road well enough. It dipped low for maybe half a mile, then rose toward the highway. The first flooded stretch was nothing. Maybe 3 inches of water across the road, reflecting my headlights like glass. I drove through slow. The second stretch was deeper. Water covered both lanes from ditch to ditch. I stopped at the edge and stared ahead through the windshield. My headlights reached maybe 30 yards across the flooded lane, then got swallowed by mist rising off the warm water. I should have turned around. I actually put the truck in reverse for a second. Then I remembered the other way home added almost 40 minutes, and the water didn't look fast, just standing runoff. I'd crossed worse in that truck. So I eased forward. The tires entered the water with a soft push, and ripples spread out in front of the bumper. I kept the speed low, maybe 5 miles an hour, both hands on the wheel. The water reached the bottom of the doors. Not great, but manageable. That's when I noticed the reflection ahead. A bright white patch slid across the flooded road maybe 50 yards in front of me. At first I thought lightning had flashed behind the clouds, but there was no thunder, and the reflection didn't vanish. It moved slowly across the water from left to right, smooth and steady like a spotlight shining down from above. I leaned forward and looked up through the windshield. Nothing. The sky was solid black clouds, no aircraft lights, no moon, no break in the storm cover. The reflection kept moving. It was too bright for anything on the ground, but there was no source above it. It made the floodwater shine in a long oval shape, pale and soft around the edges. I slowed almost to a stop. The moment I did, my headlights dimmed. Not all the way out, just weakened, like the battery suddenly drained. The road ahead turned darker, and the reflection became the brightest thing in sight. I tapped the gas lightly. The headlights came back to normal. I remember laughing once, real short, because I was trying to make it normal in my head. Bad alternator. Wet wiring, reflection from some farm equipment beyond the trees. But there were no farms close enough on that stretch, just woods and low fields. The bright reflection drifted closer. My headlights dimmed again. This time the dashboard lights faded too. The radio, which had been playing quietly, cut into static for about 2 seconds, then came back. I stopped breathing for a moment without realizing it. The reflection stayed ahead of me, floating across the surface of the flooded road. It didn't ripple with the water like my headlights did. It moved over the floodwater like it wasn't touching it. I looked up again. Still nothing overhead. No glow in the clouds. No shape. Just darkness. Then the frogs stopped. That was the first thing that really scared me. The ditches had been loud since I left Ray's place. Constant frogs and insects and water dripping through leaves. Suddenly it all went quiet at once. The truck engine sounded too loud after that. I rolled my window down a crack, thinking maybe the glass had muffled things weird. Warm, wet air came in. No frogs, no insects, no wind, just the idle of my truck and the water lapping against the tires. There was also a smell, wet leaves mostly, but underneath it something sharp, like hot metal after rain hits it. I rolled the window back up. The reflection moved closer again. My headlights dimmed so much that for a second I could barely see the hood. The radio turned to static and stayed there. I reached for the power button, but before I touched it, a voice came through. Not clear. Not like a station. More like somebody talking through a wall. I heard maybe 2 or 3 syllables, low and stretched out. Then static swallowed it again. The reflection stopped maybe 20 yards ahead of my bumper. I could see the water around it now. Brown flood water, leaves floating on top, little bubbles near the ditches. The bright patch sat on the surface, but it didn't show any object above it. It looked like the water itself was glowing. I put the truck in reverse. The gear shift felt stiff in my hand. The truck didn't move. The engine revved softly when I pressed the gas, but the tires didn't spin. No splash, no rocking. It felt like the truck had settled onto something solid under the water. I pressed harder. Nothing. Then came a knock from beneath the floorboard. One solid tap. I froze with my foot still on the pedal. Another tap came from under the passenger side. Then one under my seat. Not rocks, not debris. They were spaced too carefully. Tap, tap, tap. I put the truck back in drive and tried to creep forward instead. This time it moved, just barely. The reflection ahead slid backward away from me, staying the exact same distance in front of the hood. I whispered, "No," though I didn't mean to. The headlights dimmed again as the reflection brightened. The entire cab filled with pale light for maybe 2 seconds. I could see everything inside the truck too clearly. The cracked vinyl on the passenger seat, my empty coffee cup, mud on my boots, rainwater dripping from my sleeve onto my jeans. Then something moved in the side mirror. I looked. At first, I thought it was a person standing in the water behind the truck. Only a dark shape, waist deep in the flooded road. Tall, thin, completely still. I whipped around to look out the rear window. Nothing there. Just black water and the faint red glow of my taillights reflecting behind me. When I looked back at the mirror, the shape was gone. The reflection ahead drifted closer again. My headlights dimmed until the road almost disappeared. Then the truck radio made a low pulsing sound under the static. Not music, not speech, a slow hum. I felt it through the steering wheel. The water outside started moving strangely then, not flowing down the road. It pulled inward from both ditches toward the center lane, making tiny waves that met in front of the truck. Leaves and sticks turned slowly in little circles. The reflection brightened in the middle of it. I looked up through the windshield again, and this time I thought I saw something in the clouds. Not a shape exactly. A darker patch inside the dark, directly above the flooded lane. The kind of thing you only notice because the clouds around it look slightly wrong. Then my headlights went completely out. The engine stayed running. The dashboard clock remained lit. 12:38. The radio static cut off too. The sudden darkness outside was total except for that white reflection on the water. It was right in front of me now, maybe 10 feet away. And with the headlights gone, I could see it wasn't just a reflection. There was light coming from somewhere above the road, but whatever made it stayed invisible. The water lit from the surface up like the brightness was trapped between the floodwater and the air. The cab temperature changed. It got warm fast. Not heater warm. Damp, heavy warm, like stepping into a greenhouse. My windshield fogged from the outside. I watched moisture spread across the glass in slow lines, but the lines didn't run down. They moved sideways toward the center. A sound came from the passenger window, a soft scrape. I stared straight ahead. Another scrape, longer. Something dragged lightly along the glass outside, even though the passenger side was over flooded ditch water and there was nothing close enough to touch it. I looked over. The window was fogged pale. For a second, against that fog, I saw the outline of something narrow pressed near the glass. Not a hand exactly. More like 3 long marks appearing at once. Then they faded. I slammed the lock button even though the doors were already locked. The radio came back on with one loud burst of static. The dashboard clock blinked. 12:38. 12:38. The seconds didn't change anymore. The knocking returned beneath the truck. This time it moved in a line from the rear axle toward the front bumper. Tap, 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 tap. Then the hood dipped slightly, like weight had settled on it. I sat there, gripping the wheel, unable to move. The reflection ahead brightened until I had to squint. And in that brightness, I saw the flooded road beyond it stretch much farther than it should have. Harlow Lane was straight, but not that straight. There was supposed to be a curve near the old cattle gate. Now the road continued endlessly through black water. Fence posts repeated on both sides at perfect intervals. The same fallen branch appeared ahead on the right shoulder, then again farther down. I felt dizzy looking at it. I shut my eyes. The hum deepened inside the cab, and for a few seconds I couldn't tell if I was still sitting upright. My stomach lifted like I'd gone over a hill too fast, except the truck wasn't moving. Then everything dropped back into place. The engine noise returned full and loud. The headlights snapped on. The radio went back to the same country station I'd been listening to earlier, mid-song. Water splashed outward as the tires suddenly caught. I jerked forward in the seat and realized the truck was moving again. The reflection was gone. The frogs were back, loud as before, maybe louder. I drove straight through the flooded stretch without stopping. Water pushed against the doors and sprayed over the hood, but the truck made it. When the road finally rose out of the low area, I pulled onto the shoulder near a mailbox and just sat there shaking. The dashboard clock read 1 for 14. I stared at it because it had been 12:38, maybe minutes earlier. There was no way that much time had passed. My phone sat in the cup holder. It had been at 60% when I left Ray's. Now it was dead. I got out with my flashlight, though I don't know what I expected to find. The truck was soaked, obviously, but something about the front looked wrong. Both headlights were coated in a thin, pale film, not mud, not regular floodwater. It looked like dried mineral deposits, white and gritty, covering the lenses in a fine layer. I wiped one with my thumb. The film came off like powder, but underneath it, the plastic felt warm. Warm headlights made sense after driving, but the hood was warm too. So was the windshield. The rest of the truck was cold and wet. I walked around to the passenger side and found 3 long streaks on the window. They started near the top and curved downward toward the door handle. The glass was wet everywhere, but those streaks were different. Clean lines through the grime, like something had wiped them from outside. There was mud on the passenger door, not splashed mud, finger-width smears angled upward. I stood there with the flashlight shaking in my hand. Then I heard water dripping from somewhere underneath the truck. A steady rhythm. I crouched and looked. The flooded road water poured off the frame normally, but mixed into it were tiny pale fragments collecting on the gravel below. Thin bits that looked like flakes of shell or dried paint. I touched one. It dissolved instantly into powder between my fingers and smelled like hot metal. I got back in the truck and drove the rest of the way home without the radio on. The next morning, I checked the truck again in daylight. The headlight film was still there in places I hadn't wiped clean. The white powder had dried into the seams around the grille. The passenger window streaks remained too, faint but visible when sunlight hit them. I called Ray and asked if Harlow Lane had washed out or if anyone reported anything weird around there. He said the sheriff closed it at midnight because water got too deep. I told him I drove through after that. He asked how, because a county barricade had been placed across both lanes near the west entrance. I drove back that afternoon. The barricade was there. Orange and white, weighted with sandbags, stretched across the road exactly where I should have turned onto Harlow Lane the night before. There were no tire tracks going around it, no gap, no sign anyone had moved it. On the other side, the flooded lane sat quiet under gray daylight. Brown water covered the road from ditch to ditch. And right in the center of it, maybe 50 yards past the barricade, a perfect pale oval floated on the surface for a few seconds before the wind rippled through and broke it apart. I worked seasonal grounds for the county fairgrounds outside Grand Island, Nebraska. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly trash, power cords, parking signs, hose lines, locking gates, checking bathrooms, making sure nobody stayed hidden inside after closing. During Fair Week, we finished late every night because people took forever leaving. This happened near the end of August, after a long hot day that turned into a damp, cloudy night. The fair closed at 11, but I didn't start my final walk until almost midnight because the last families kept hanging around by the funnel cake stand and livestock barns. By then, the midway had shut down. The music was off, the food trucks were dark, ride operators were gone or sleeping in campers behind the vendor fence. The place looked strange after everyone left. During the day, it was all lights and noise, kids screaming, generators running, animals bawling in the barns. After closing, it became this huge empty lot full of silent metal shapes. That night, the clouds hung low enough to reflect some of the parking lot lights back down. Everything had a dull gray color. The asphalt was wet from a short storm earlier, and puddles held broken reflections of rides and booths. I started at the south gate and worked my way through the grounds with a flashlight and radio. Normal routine. Check the beer tent. Lock the side restrooms. Make sure no one was sleeping in the grandstand. Around 12:25, I was crossing the midway near the kiddie rides when I heard metal creaking. Slow. Rhythmic. At first, I thought wind was moving one of the ride panels. There had been gusts all evening and loose signs kept slapping against fences. But this sound had a pattern. Creak. Pause. Creak. Pause. I stopped near the ring toss booth and listened. The sound came from the tilt-a-whirl. It sat about 50 yards away near the center of the midway, dark except for a few tiny bulbs along the frame that stayed on from battery backup or leftover current. The ride was supposed to be locked, powered down, and chained. But one of the cars was moving, not rocking. Turning. The whole platform rotated slowly, barely faster than walking speed. No lights running, no music, no operator at the booth, no generator sound. Just the platform turning in the dark. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to understand what I was seeing. The power boxes for that section had been shut off an hour earlier. I knew because I'd watched Ronnie, the electrician, throw the disconnects before leaving. The ride should not have moved. I walked closer, keeping my flashlight aimed low. The platform continued its slow circle. The empty cars swung slightly as they passed, squeaking at the hinges. Each one faced outward like it was carrying invisible riders. I called out, "Hey, anybody over there?" No answer. The fairgrounds stayed quiet. Too quiet, actually. I realized the generators behind the food row had all stopped. Usually a few vendors had kept small units running overnight for coolers, but I couldn't hear any of them now. No insects either. No distant highway traffic. Just the slow creaking of the ride. Then I noticed the glow above it. A pale white light hung low in the cloudy sky directly over the tilt-a-whirl. Not high like an airplane. Maybe a few hundred feet up, though it was hard to judge because of the low clouds. It looked partly hidden by the cloud base, like a dull bulb behind thick fabric. It didn't cast a beam. It didn't blink. It just sat there. The clouds around it glowed faintly, but the ride underneath stayed mostly dark. That bothered me right away because if the light was overhead, the whole midway should have been lit. Instead, only the metal edges of the ride caught little pale highlights. I remember swallowing hard and checking my radio. The screen was on but showed no channel number. Just blank green light. I pressed the button anyway. "Dale, you still on site?" Only static. Dale was the night supervisor, usually parked near the main office doing paperwork until 1. I was close enough that the radio should have reached him easily. The tilt-a-whirl kept turning. Creak, creak, creak. The platform moved so smoothly it almost looked gentle. Then one of the cars rocked inward as it came around near me. Not from momentum. It tilted like weight had shifted inside it. I took a step back. The pale glow above the ride brightened slightly. At the same moment, the air changed temperature. The fairgrounds had been cool and damp after the storm, but around the ride the air felt warm. Heavy, too. Like stepping into a closed-up trailer that had sat in sun all day. I smelled wet metal. Not rust exactly, more like rainwater on hot electrical equipment. I aimed my flashlight at the operator booth. Empty. The control panel cover was down, padlocked. The emergency stop button sat untouched under its plastic guard. The power cable feeding the ride was disconnected from the temporary box and coiled on the ground. I stared at that cable for a long moment because my brain finally ran out of normal explanations. Then the ride slowed. Just a little. The cars creaked around one more time. Above it, the pale glow remained perfectly still despite clouds moving across the rest of the sky. I heard a sound behind me from the games row, a soft clatter, like plastic bottles being knocked over. I spun around with the flashlight. Nothing there. The milk bottle game booth was empty. Stuffed animals hung motionless from the racks. A tarp shifted slightly in the wind, except I realized there was no wind where I stood. The flags above the food trucks weren't moving anymore. The loose signs that had been slapping earlier hung flat. Everything in the midway had gone still except the ride. The radio crackled again. This time I heard a voice under the static. Not Dale. Not anyone I recognized. It sounded far away and calm, like someone speaking from the other end of a long hallway. I couldn't make out words, but the rhythm felt like a question being repeated. I pressed the call button again. "Dale, I need you at the midway. Something's wrong with the tilt-a-whirl." The second I said that, the ride stopped. Not gradually, instantly. The platform froze so fast the nearest car swung forward on its hinge, then settled with a soft squeal. The pale glow above the ride dimmed, then vanished into the low clouds. Gone. No movement away, no fading trail, just cloudy sky again. All at once, the fairgrounds sounds returned. A generator coughed to life somewhere behind the corn dog stand. Highway noise rose faintly from beyond the parking lot. A loose sign started banging against a fence again. My radio clicked. Dale's voice came through clear. "What do you mean something's wrong?" I couldn't answer right away. I walked backward from the ride, staring at it. Completely still now. Dark. Normal. Dale said my name twice before I told him to come look. He arrived in a golf cart maybe 4 minutes later with a half-eaten sandwich in one hand, annoyed at first. I showed him the disconnected power cable, the padlocked control booth, the shutoff box. I told him I'd seen it turning. He stared at the ride, then looked at me like he was deciding whether I was messing with him. "Wind can move stuff," he said. I told him there hadn't been any wind. He didn't answer that. Then we both heard one of the cars settle, a tiny creak. Dale pointed his flashlight at it. The car nearest us was facing slightly different from the others. Its seat cushion was wet, not rain wet. The whole ride had been rained on earlier, sure, but this was different. The seat held a small puddle even though it sat under the car shell. The water looked almost milky under the flashlight. Dale touched it with one finger and immediately wiped his hand on his jeans. "Smells like pennies," he said. That made my stomach tighten because I'd smelled the same thing in the air. We walked around the ride looking for damage. Nothing obvious. No footprints in the wet dirt around it except mine and Dale's. No sign anyone had climbed in. Then Dale's flashlight landed on the platform floor. There were streaks across it, long, narrow marks in the moisture, curving from the center toward one of the cars. Not footprints, more like someone dragged damp fingers through dust. Dale got quiet after seeing those. He finally said, "We'll check cameras tomorrow." I asked if the Midway cameras covered this ride. He said they should. Then we both heard tapping, 3 soft taps from inside the operator booth. Tap, tap, tap. Dale and I froze. The booth stood locked 10 feet away. Its windows were dark. Nobody could have gotten inside without breaking the padlock or climbing through the tiny service hatch. Dale lifted his flashlight slowly, nothing visible inside. He walked up and tried the door. Locked. He rattled it once, then backed away. Neither of us said anything for a while. We left together after that. Dale told me to skip the rest of my sweep and go home. He tried to sound casual, but his face looked pale under the golf cart headlights. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I came in early because I wanted to see the cameras before everyone started pretending nothing happened. Dale was already in the office with Ronnie and the fair manager, Bev. They were watching the security footage on the old monitor by the filing cabinets. The camera facing the tilt-a-whirl worked fine until 12:27 a.m. The ride sat still. Empty midway. Then the video glitched. Not static. The image simply froze for what the timestamp said was 11 seconds. When it resumed, the platform was already turning slowly. No one near it. No lights on. No operator. The pale glow wasn't visible on camera, only a washed-out patch in the clouds above the ride that made the top of the frame look overexposed. The ride kept spinning for almost 6 minutes. Then, right at the moment I appeared in frame with my flashlight and lifted the radio to call Dale, the footage glitched again. When it came back, the ride was stopped. The timestamp jumped ahead 22 minutes. Nobody liked that. Ronnie checked the power logs and said that whole ride section had stayed disconnected since 11:18 p.m. the night before. No spikes, no shorts, no temporary draw. But one thing had logged strangely. The ticket scanner at the tilt-a-whirl, which was supposed to be powered off with everything else, recorded one scan at 12:31 a.m. No ticket number, no wristband ID, just a blank entry. Bev told everyone to stop talking about it around customers. By noon, the Midway was loud again, and families were lining up for rides like nothing had happened. The tilt-a-whirl ran normally after inspection, but when I went behind it to collect trash later that afternoon, I found something under the operator booth. A strip of damp paper stuck to the underside of the step. At first, I thought it was part of an old wristband. I pulled it loose. It was blank except for 3 pale gray circles printed in a row, each one about the size of a fingerprint. The paper felt warm in my hand despite sitting in shade. When I folded it, it cracked into powder along the crease and left a metallic smell on my fingers. That night, I was assigned the north parking lot instead of the midway. I was fine with that. Around closing, while walking between cars with my trash picker, I looked back toward the rides. The tilt-a-whirl was dark and still. Above it, low in the clouds, a pale white glow appeared for maybe 2 seconds. Then every ride light on the midway flickered once together. When the lights steadied, the glow was gone. I was working the evening shift at a grain elevator outside Hutchinson, Kansas, when this happened. Not the huge industrial kind you see from the highway, but big enough that everyone in town knew it. 4 tall storage bins, 1 older concrete elevator, a scale house, and a gravel lot that turned into mud every time it rained. This was in late September, right after harvest started slowing down. The days were still warm, but evenings cooled off fast once the sun dropped. That night had been clear and dry with a hard orange sunset behind the fields. I was the last one there. That wasn't unusual. I handled cleanup, checked augers, locked the scale office, and made sure the access hatches on the bins were secured before leaving. My supervisor, Dale, always made a big deal about that because kids from town had climbed the bins a few years earlier and almost got themselves killed. By around 8:15 p.m., the lot was empty except for my pickup. The farmers were gone. Dale had left an hour before. The scale house lights were still on, but everything beyond them was turning dark. The place always made noises after sunset. Metal bins ticking as they cooled, belts settling, grain shifting inside like faint rain. I was used to it. That night, though, the noises stopped. That was the first thing I noticed. I was sweeping around the loading pit when the whole elevator seemed to go quiet at once. No settling grain. No insects in the weeds near the fence. No distant highway hum either, even though the highway sat less than a mile away. I stopped sweeping and listened. Nothing. Then one of the lights over the loading bay flickered. Just once. I looked toward the power pole, thinking maybe we were about to lose electricity, but the scale house stayed lit. The yard light above the office buzzed normally. I finished sweeping faster after that. I locked the shop door, checked the south gate, and started my last walk around the bins. The biggest bin sat at the far end of the property, near a row of dry sunflowers along the ditch. It had a ladder running up the side and a small access hatch near the roof. I always checked that hatch from the ground with a flashlight. You could see if the latch had been disturbed because it hung just below the roof lip. That was when I saw the glow. At first, I thought the moon had come out behind the bins. There was a soft white light above the storage tanks, just higher than the roofline. Not bright enough to cast sharp shadows, more like fog lit from inside. But the sky was clear. No moon in that direction, no clouds. The glow hovered above the bins without making any sound. I stood there with the flashlight hanging in my hand, not even pointed at anything anymore. My first normal thought was drone. Somebody messing around after dark. Kids, maybe, but I couldn't hear propellers. And it didn't blink or move, it just hung there. The metal wall of the nearest bin started ticking, soft at first. Tick, tick, tick. That sound wasn't unusual by itself. Metal ticked when it cooled, but then the second bin started, then the third, then all 4 storage bins were ticking together in this slow, uneven rhythm. It sounded like rain hitting tin, except there was no rain. The glow stayed above them. I remember backing up a step because the sound seemed to come from every side at once. Not loud, just constant and close. The air smelled strange too. Not grain dust, not diesel. Something sharper. Hot metal mixed with wet dirt, even though the yard was bone dry. I clicked my flashlight off without thinking. The glow didn't change. It was brighter than I wanted it to be, and at the same time not bright enough to explain anything. The sides of the bins didn't shine the way they should have. The metal only caught faint pale streaks along the curves. I took out my phone to call Dale. No signal. That wasn't completely crazy out there, but usually I could get 1 bar near the office. I walked back toward the scale house holding the phone up like an idiot. Still nothing. Behind me, the ticking got faster. Not much, just enough that I noticed. I turned around. The glow looked lower. I don't mean I saw it descend. It was just lower than it had been a few seconds earlier. Now it seemed to hover between the tops of the bins instead of above them. A pale white shape, blurry around the edges. I could not see any object inside it clearly, but there was a darker center, like something solid was wrapped in light. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain it as a drone. The scale house door was maybe 30 yards behind me. I started walking toward it without taking my eyes off the bins. The gravel under my boots sounded wrong, too soft, like I was walking on packed dirt instead of rock. The ticking continued. Then the old concrete elevator made a deep hollow knock, one time, from high up. I froze. Another knock came from the metal stairwell attached to the side. Then another from inside the loading spout. Knock, knock, knock. Not random settling. It moved downward. The sound traveled through the structure slowly, from the top of the elevator to somewhere near the ground. I turned and walked faster toward the office. The yard light above the scale house flickered twice. The glow between the bins brightened. At the same time, every shadow in the lot seemed to lean toward it. I know that sounds dramatic, but I don't know how else to describe it. The poles, the fence, the auger frame, even my own shadow stretched the wrong way for a second, like that glow was pulling light out of the yard instead of giving it off. Then my radio clipped to my belt made a burst of static. We used cheap handhelds around the elevator, mostly for directing trucks during busy days. Mine should have been quiet because everyone had gone home. The static hissed for 3 or 4 seconds. Then a voice came through. Not Dale, not anyone I knew. It was low and broken, buried under crackling noise. I couldn't make out words, but it had the pattern of someone talking calmly from far away. I grabbed the radio and pressed the button. Who is this? The static stopped. The ticking stopped too, all at once. The silence hit so hard I felt pressure in my ears. The glow remained. I stood there halfway between the bins and the scale house, holding the radio in one hand and my dead phone in the other. Then something moved on the ladder of the big bin. I saw it only because it crossed the pale light. A darker shape near the upper rungs. At first I thought it was a person climbing down. That was where my brain went immediately, because what else would a shape on a ladder be? I yelled, "Hey, you need to get down from there." No answer. The shape didn't climb. It seemed to hang against the ladder for a second, too long, too thin. Then it slipped sideways around the curve of the bin and disappeared from sight. The ticking started again, this time only from the big bin. Faster. Tick, 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 tick. I backed up until my shoulder hit the scale house door. I nearly dropped my keys getting it open. Inside, everything looked normal. Fluorescent light buzzing overhead, desk covered in scale tickets, coffee cup in the sink, Dale's old calendar on the wall. I locked the door behind me and stood there breathing hard. Through the window facing the bins, I could still see the glow. It hovered lower now, almost level with the top catwalk. I picked up the landline. Dead. No dial tone. That scared me worse than the phone because the office line almost never went down. It was old copper, separate from whatever cell service did. I set the receiver back carefully. Then I noticed the clock on the wall. 8:22. I checked my wristwatch. 8:22. That helped for about half a second. Then the wall clock's second hand stopped. My watch kept ticking. The fluorescent light above me dimmed slowly until the office turned gray. The glow outside brightened in response. The windows began to vibrate faintly in their frames, not rattling from wind. A hum, low and steady. It came up through the floor, through the desk legs, through my boots. I looked down and saw dust moving across the tile in thin lines toward the door. Grain dust, dirt, tiny flakes of dried mud from people's boots. All of it slid slowly in one direction, toward the bins. I backed away from the window. Something tapped the glass. I did not move. Another tap came. Light. Careful, from outside. The window sat high enough that no person could tap it without standing on something. I stared at the glass. A pale streak appeared there, right at eye level. Not a handprint. More like condensation forming from the outside in 3 narrow lines. Then the glow outside vanished. Complete darkness returned around the bins. The office lights snapped back to full brightness. The wall clock started moving again. The landline made one short chirp, like it had reset itself. For a second, I almost believed it was over. Then the access alarm on the panel beside the door lit up red. Bin 4 hatch. It flashed twice, then went dark. Bin 4 was the big one, the one where I'd seen the shape on the ladder. I didn't go outside right away. I stayed in the scale house maybe 10 minutes, watching through the window. Nothing moved. The glow didn't return. The bins looked normal against the dark sky. Eventually, I forced myself to leave because I couldn't stay locked in that office all night. The yard sounded normal again. Crickets near the ditch, distant highway, metal creaking quietly as temperatures dropped. The air still smelled faintly of hot metal, though. I walked fast to my pickup, keeping the bins on my left. The big bin's ladder sat empty. The access hatch wasn't visible from where I stood, not clearly. I started the truck. The engine turned over fine, but the radio came on to static even though I'd shut it off earlier. I turned the knob. Static. Changed station. Static. Then through it, I heard the same low voice again. Just one short phrase this time. It sounded like, "Not yet." I slapped the radio off hard enough to hurt my fingers and drove out of the lot without locking the main gate. I didn't sleep much. Around 6:30 the next morning, Dale called asking why the front gate was open. He sounded annoyed until he got to bin 4. Then he went quiet. I drove back out there even though I didn't want to. By the time I arrived, 2 other guys were standing near the big bin looking up. Dale had his hands on his hips. Miguel from the morning crew stood beside him smoking a cigarette he hadn't lit. The access hatch near the top of bin 4 was open, wide open. The lock was still hanging from the latch. That was the part nobody liked. The lock wasn't cut. The shackle was closed. The keyway looked fine. But the hatch door had somehow swung open with the lock still secured through the hasp, like the metal bracket around it had passed through the lock without breaking. Dale kept saying maybe someone forgot to latch it right. I told him I'd checked it from the ground the night before. He asked if I climbed up. I said no. He didn't ask anything else. We went up together later with harnesses to inspect it. The climb felt normal in daylight, but I could barely put my hands on the rungs without thinking about that shape I'd seen. Near the upper ladder, there were dark smears on the metal. Dirt. Fresh. Not grease. Not bird mess. Wet-looking dirt on dry steel. It formed long, narrow streaks along the outside of several rungs, like muddy fingers had wrapped around them from the wrong side. Dale touched one and smelled it. He made a face. Smells burned. At the hatch, the metal door felt warm, not sun-warm. The sun had barely hit that side yet, just warm enough that both of us noticed. Inside the bin, the grain looked normal, except for one place near the center. A shallow circular depression sat in the top layer, maybe 6 feet across. Not deep, just pressed smooth as if something broad and heavy had rested on the grain without sinking far into it. There were no footprints leading to it, no drag marks, nothing. Dale didn't say anything for a long time. On the way down, my boot slipped near the lower ladder cage. I grabbed the rung hard and felt something stuck underneath. A piece of pale material no bigger than a fingernail. Thin and brittle, almost translucent. I peeled it loose and held it between my fingers. It didn't feel like plastic or paint. Before I could show Dale, it crumbled into fine powder and blew away in the morning breeze. When I got home later, I found grain dust inside the collar of my jacket. Not on the outside. Inside. Packed along the back seam like somebody had poured a small handful down my neck. Mixed with it was the same dark dirt from the ladder. I shook the jacket over my porch. The dust fell in a narrow line across the boards. For a second, before the wind scattered it, the grains arranged themselves into a perfect circle. I lived on the 8th floor of an apartment block in Queens when this happened. The building wasn't nice, but it wasn't terrible either. Old brick, narrow halls, radiators that clanked all winter, elevators that worked only when they felt like it. The laundry room was on my floor, which was the only good thing about that apartment. It sat at the end of the hallway, beside the shared balcony, where people went to smoke or hang towels when the dryers broke. The balcony wasn't really a balcony in the pretty sense, more like a concrete platform with a metal railing and a view into the alley between buildings. You could see the backs of other apartment blocks, fire escapes, air conditioners, bedroom windows, and a strip of sky if you looked straight up. This happened in late March during a wind advisory. It had rained most of the afternoon, and by night the rain stopped, but the wind got worse. It pushed between the buildings in hard gusts that made the balcony door whistle. Trash bags moved around down in the alley. Loose plastic slapped against fences. Every few minutes, something metallic banged somewhere outside and echoed upward. I started laundry around 10:30 because I'd forgotten I needed clean work shirts. I remember being annoyed because all three washers were empty, which never happened, but the one I picked sounded rough from the start. The drum kept thumping like the clothes were uneven, even though it was just shirts and jeans. The cycle said 38 minutes when I pressed start. I went back to my apartment, watched half an episode of something, then remembered I had to move the clothes before someone else did. People in that building loved dumping wet laundry on top of the machines if you were even 5 minutes late. When I got back to the laundry room, the washer still had 19 minutes left. I checked because I was irritated. 19 minutes. So I figured I'd step out onto the shared balcony for air while I waited. I had a plastic laundry basket under one arm with the dryer sheets and some clean towels I'd brought from my apartment. The hallway was quiet except for the wind pressing against the balcony door. The laundry room light flickered once as I passed through it. Not unusual. The building wiring was old. I opened the balcony door and the wind hit me so hard the basket almost slipped out of my hand. Cold air came through, damp and gritty, smelling like rain, hot vents, and garbage from the alley below. I stepped outside and pulled the door almost shut behind me. The first thing I noticed was that the building across from mine had more windows dark than usual. Normally at that hour you'd see TVs, kitchen lights, people moving around. That night, the whole row of buildings looked asleep. The second thing I noticed was the oval light. It hung between our building and the one across the alley. Not high up, maybe level with the 10th or 11th floor. It was dim, pale white, and shaped like an egg on its side, not sharp around the edges. It looked hazy, almost like a reflection on dirty glass, except there was no glass in front of it. I stood there staring because for a second I thought it had to be a light from someone's apartment reflecting in fog. But the wind was too strong for fog to sit still, and the light did not move at all. That was what bothered me first. The gusts pushed my shirt against my chest and shook the railing under my hand. Bits of paper flew through the alley below. A plastic bag spun upward, maybe 3 floors before getting slammed into a fire escape. But the oval light stayed perfectly still. It didn't sway, didn't flicker, didn't drift between buildings, it just hung there. I looked around for a projector or window that might explain it. There were a few lit apartments below it, but nothing lined up. One blue TV glow on the 5th floor, a yellow kitchen light on the 7th. Neither could make that shape in the middle of open air. The light itself barely lit anything around it. The brick walls near it should have caught some glow if it was real light, but they stayed mostly dark. Only the edges of a few fire escape bars had a faint pale outline. I remember thinking maybe it was a drone. People flew drones around the city sometimes, even though they weren't supposed to, but there was no sound. No propellers, no blinking red or green lights. Just the wind and that dim white oval sitting there like it had been placed in the air. I watched it for maybe 30 seconds. Then the wind stopped, not faded down, stopped. Everything outside went still at once. The paper in the alley dropped straight down. The plastic bag hanging from the fire escape froze against the railing. My hair stopped moving around my face. I could still hear the wind above the roofs, a distant rushing sound, but in the gap between the buildings there was suddenly no air movement at all. The silence after the wind vanished felt wrong. I heard a washing machine behind me through the door. Thump, thump, thump. Then that stopped too. I turned and looked through the glass panel in the balcony door. The laundry room light was on. Machines sat in a row. Nothing strange inside. When I looked back, the oval light seemed closer. Not much, maybe only a few feet, but I was sure it had been farther toward the opposite building before. Now it looked nearer to the center of the alley. I took one step backward toward the door. The concrete under my shoes felt warm. That made me look down. The balcony floor was normally cold at night, especially after rain, but the spot where I stood had a weird warmth coming through the soles of my sneakers. Not hot, more like someone had placed a heating pad under the concrete. I shifted my foot away. Cool concrete. I stepped back onto the same spot. Warm again. The oval light remained completely still. I don't know why I did this, but I raised one hand slightly, like testing whether someone in another window might wave back. Nothing happened. Then the metal railing began to hum, softly. I felt it before I heard it because my left hand was still wrapped around the wet rail. A low vibration buzzed through my fingers. I pulled away quickly, thinking there was some electrical problem, maybe a bad ground from the building lights. The hum continued. Not loud, just enough that I felt it in my teeth after a few seconds. The oval light brightened slightly, still dim overall, but more solid in the middle. The edges stayed blurred. Inside it, I thought I saw something darker move across, like a shadow passing behind frosted glass. I backed into the balcony door. The handle was behind me, but I didn't open it right away. I didn't want to turn my back to the light. I kept staring at it, waiting for it to become something normal. A window reflection, a drone, a weird cloud, anything. Then one of the apartment windows across the alley opened by itself. At least that was what it looked like. A dark window, maybe 2 floors below the light, slid upward 6 inches. I heard the scrape of old glass even through the distance. No person appeared. The curtain inside moved outward once, though there was no wind anymore. Then the window slid shut. I remember whispering, "No." My voice sounded flat outside, like the alley had swallowed the echo. The hum in the railing deepened. The balcony light above the door flickered once. The oval light did not move, but it seemed closer again when the bulb steadied. Now it hung maybe 20 feet from the balcony railing, close enough that I could judge its size better, maybe 5 or 6 feet wide, maybe taller than a person. The air around it looked slightly distorted, not like heat shimmer exactly, more like the buildings behind it didn't line up right through its edges. The brick seams bent subtly near it. I reached back for the door handle. Before I could grab it, there was a tapping sound from the glass. Not outside, behind me. 3 light taps from inside the laundry room door. Tap, tap, tap. I turned fast. Nobody stood in the laundry room. The machines were all still. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. My washer door showed water and clothes pressed against the round glass. Then I saw the digital display. It read 00, cycle complete. That didn't make sense. It had 19 minutes left when I stepped outside. I had been on the balcony maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3 at most. The display changed while I stared. It blinked once, then showed 18, then 00 again. I pushed the balcony door open and stepped inside quickly, dragging the basket with me. The second I crossed the threshold, wind slammed into the door from outside so hard it almost ripped it from my hand. The gusts returned full force. The railing rattled. The plastic bag outside broke free and vanished upward. I pulled the door shut and locked it. Then I stood in the laundry room, breathing hard. The washer was done, not just stopped. Done. The door unlocked with its little click. Steam touched the glass inside. I checked my phone. 10:57 p.m. That made no sense either. I had started the washer around 10:30, checked it with 19 minutes left, then stepped outside. It should have been maybe 10:50, maybe 10:51. Not 10:57, unless I had stood out there much longer than I remembered. I opened the washer. The clothes were warm. That bothered me because it was a cold wash. I reached in and touched the drum. Warm too. Not dangerously hot. Just warmer than it should have been. The laundry room smelled strange. Not detergent, not mildew, wet concrete, and hot pennies. I looked at the balcony door window. The oval light was gone. Outside was just darkness, wind, and wet brick walls. I moved my clothes into a dryer with shaking hands, but I didn't start it. I just stood there listening. The building sounded normal again. Pipes in the wall, elevator cables clunking somewhere, a TV playing faintly through someone's apartment door down the hall. Then the washing machine beside mine turned on by itself, empty. The drum rotated once slowly. Water clicked in the pipes, but none came out. I stared at it. The display remained blank. The drum rotated again, then stopped. I grabbed my wet clothes from the dryer, shoved them into the basket, and left. I didn't even close the dryer door. The hallway felt longer than usual on the way back to my apartment. I know that sounds dramatic, but the 8th floor corridor was short. Laundry room at one end, elevators halfway down, my apartment 3 doors past that. That night I passed 4 apartment doors before reaching the elevators, not 2. I noticed because I knew my neighbor's mats. A red mat with cats, a black mat that said, "Go away." A green mat with no apartment number because the tenant kept taking it down. I passed the cat mat twice. Same scratches on the door, same sticker residue above the peephole. I stopped and looked back toward the laundry room. The hallway behind me looked normal, only 3 doors. I stood there, holding the basket against my chest, wet clothes dripping down my shirt. Then the elevator dinged. I hadn't pressed the button. The doors opened slowly. Inside, the light flickered pale white instead of yellow. I didn't get in. I walked the rest of the way to my apartment, fast, keeping close to the wall. When I got inside, I locked the door and put the chain on. My apartment windows faced the street, not the alley, so I couldn't see the balcony side from there. I stood in my kitchen holding wet laundry, feeling stupid and scared at the same time. Then I noticed my microwave clock, 11:20 p.m. My phone still said 10:58. My phone still said 10:58. The cheap wall clock above the sink, 10:20. My phone froze on 10:58 for another few seconds, then jumped to 11:21 all at once. I dropped the laundry basket on the floor. The wet clothes smelled like the laundry room now. Hot pennies and concrete. One of my white work shirts had gray streaks across the back. Not dirt from the washer. The streaks looked like something had pressed 3 wet fingers against the fabric and dragged downward. Long marks, too narrow and too clean to be from machine grind. I hung everything over chairs because I didn't want to go back to the laundry room. Around midnight, someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 soft taps. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't move. The hallway stayed quiet. No footsteps. No voice. I looked through the peephole after maybe a full minute. No one stood outside, but the hall light near my door was flickering, and on the floor just below the peephole there were wet marks in the hallway carpet. Not footprints exactly. 3 narrow, damp lines like water had dripped from something pointed. They stopped right at my door. I backed away and didn't sleep until the sky started getting light. The next morning I went back to the laundry room because I'd left detergent there. Everything looked normal in daylight. A woman from 8C was folding baby clothes. A guy I didn't know was waiting by the dryers. The balcony door was propped open with a plastic crate even though the wind had died down. I asked the woman if the machines had acted weird the night before. She said she didn't know, then added that her bathroom lights flickered around 11 and her dog hid under the bed. I stepped onto the balcony even though I didn't want to. The alley below looked ordinary. Dumpsters. Puddles, air conditioners, fire escapes, nothing hanging in the space between buildings. Then I looked at the railing. Near the spot where I'd touched it, the metal had a dull pale mark. Not rust, not paint. An oval patch about the size of my palm where the dark railing looked faded and dry. I touched it with one finger. Fine white powder came off on my skin. It smelled faintly metallic. Across the alley, the window I'd seen open the night before looked shut. But below it, on the brick wall, there was a vertical wet streak running down 3 floors. No pipe above it, no AC unit, no open window, just a damp line in the shape of something that had slid slowly down the outside of the building and vanished before reaching the ground. We drove out to the Bonneville Salt Flats because my girlfriend Marin wanted sunset photos. This was in late May, a few years ago, during one of those dry, windy evenings where the sky looked huge and empty. We had been staying in Wendover for one night on our way back from Reno, and she kept saying we couldn't be that close and not go see the flats. I'd been there once before as a kid, but I barely remembered it. Just white ground, mountains far away, and that weird feeling that distance didn't work right out there. We took my old Subaru because I didn't care much about the salt getting underneath it. The road out there was quiet, and by the time we pulled off onto the flats, the sun was already low. The whole place looked pale gold and pink, flat in every direction except for the dark mountains on the horizon. There were a few other cars out there when we arrived, but they were far away. Tiny shapes with people standing beside them taking pictures. Nobody close enough to hear. We parked maybe half a mile from the access road. I remember shutting the engine off and being surprised how quiet it was. The wind was moving, but there wasn't much for it to hit out there, so it made this soft rushing sound around the car instead of the normal tree or building noises. Marin got out first with her camera. I stayed in the driver's seat for a minute because my knees hurt from driving all day. The dashboard compass showed W, then NW as I turned the wheel slightly before shutting down fully. Nothing weird. Marin walked 20 yards away and started taking pictures of her shadows stretching across the salt. The ground was dry where we parked, cracked in some places, smooth in others. Every step left a faint dusty print. I got out and leaned against the hood. It felt peaceful at first, not creepy, just empty. The sun hung over the mountains like a flat orange coin, and the light made the salt look almost wet even though it wasn't. The air smelled dry and mineral heavy, like dust and old water. After a while, Marin called my name and pointed toward the horizon to the south. "Do you see that?" I followed her finger. At first I didn't, then I saw a small light moving along the horizon. White, maybe slightly yellow. Very small. I thought it was a truck at first. The flats are big, and it's easy to lose perspective. Someone could have been driving way out there. But the light wasn't bouncing. It moved smooth and steady, left to right, just above the dark line where the salt met the mountains. No sound reached us. That wasn't strange by itself because it was far away, but the movement looked odd enough that we both kept watching. Marin lowered her camera. "Is that a plane?" I looked up. Nothing in the sky. No contrails, no blinking lights, no drone sound, just a few long clouds turning orange above the mountains. The small light kept moving, slow, steady, level. I said it was probably headlights on a service road. Marin didn't answer. She brought the camera up and tried to zoom in. After a few seconds, she frowned and lowered it. "It won't focus." I laughed a little and told her everything looked weird out there. Heat shimmer, salt glare, whatever. But the sun was low and it wasn't hot anymore. The temperature had dropped enough that I pulled my sleeves over my hands. The light stopped moving, just stopped. It stayed on the horizon, small and steady. Marin looked at me then, and I could tell she felt the same little shift I did. The thing had gone from interesting to uncomfortable. We stood there for maybe a minute. Then the wind stopped. That was the first part I couldn't explain later. The flats had been breezy since we got there. Not strong wind, but constant. It pushed Marin's hair across her face and made my shirt flap against my side. Then, all at once, there was nothing. The air just died. Her hair fell still. The car stopped ticking as it cooled, or maybe I only noticed the silence after everything else went quiet. I looked around. The other cars in the distance were gone. Not literally gone, maybe. I couldn't see them anymore. The light had changed, and the flats had flattened into one pale sheet. But I'd known where at least 2 cars were parked, and now I couldn't pick them out. The small light on the horizon remained. Marin whispered, "Can we go?" I said, "Yeah, right away." I got in the driver's seat, and she climbed in beside me, still holding the camera tight with both hands. When I turned the key, the engine hesitated before starting. Not unusual. That car was old, but the dashboard lit up strangely dim for a second, then came back normal. The compass on the rearview display showed N, then E, then SW, then N again. I stared at it. Marin noticed too. Why is it doing that? The compass kept changing slowly, not jumping like a glitch. The letters rotated as if the whole car were turning in place. N, E, E, S, E, S. The car was parked still. I put it in drive but didn't move yet. The light on the horizon brightened slightly. Not much. Just enough that both of us looked up at the same time. It no longer seemed small. Or maybe it wasn't farther away anymore. That's hard to explain. It still sat on the horizon, but it looked clearer now, more solid. A white point inside a soft halo. Compass continued spinning. SW, W, NWN. Marin reached for her phone. "No signal," she said. I checked mine. Same. The battery icon showed 8%, which made no sense because it had been plugged into the car most of the drive. I eased my foot onto the gas. The Subaru rolled forward slowly. The salt crunched under the tires. For a second I felt better because moving meant this was still normal, still real. We just needed to get back to the road. But I couldn't find the access road. I knew the direction. I had parked facing roughly west, and the road should have been behind us to the east. The mountains and sunset made that obvious, but the compass was useless, and out there, everything looked the same. I turned the car in what I thought was the right direction. The light remained on the horizon to our left. Marin kept looking back at it through the passenger window. "It's moving again," she said. I glanced over. The light slid along the horizon, matching our pace somehow. Not chasing exactly, just staying parallel. There was still no sound. No engine noise from it. No aircraft, no rumble. The sun touched the mountain ridge. The compass continued circling through directions. Every few seconds, the dashboard screen dimmed, then brightened. I drove slowly because I didn't want to hit soft patches or ruts. The salt looked smooth ahead, but headlights weren't much use yet because the sun hadn't fully gone down. Then the tires passed over a wet-looking patch. The car jolted slightly, like we had crossed a shallow dip. A smell came through the vents, not the rotten brine smell you sometimes get near salt water. This was metallic, like pennies and hot dust. Marin covered her nose. "What is that?" I told her I didn't know. The compass spun faster. The letters blurred through directions now, changing every second. NESWN again. The little display looked like it was trying to find something and couldn't. Then the radio turned on. Neither of us touched it. Static filled the car, low at first, then louder. I hit the power button. Nothing happened. The static kept going. I held it down. Still nothing. Then, underneath it, I heard what sounded like voices. Not clear words. Just low speech, layered under the hiss, like people talking quietly in another room. Marin said, "Turn it off." "I'm trying." The light on the horizon stopped again. The sun slipped halfway behind the mountains. The sky darkened fast. I pressed the gas a little harder. The engine revved, but the car didn't speed up the way it should have. It felt like the tires were pushing through thick mud, even though the ground outside looked dry. Behind us, the tracks we left in the salt appeared darker than normal, wet almost. I checked the rearview mirror. For 1 second, I thought I saw somebody standing behind the car in the distance, a tall, dark shape in the middle of the flats. Then it was gone. Marin saw me look. "What?" "Nothing." She turned around anyway and stared through the back window. The static suddenly cut out. Complete silence filled the car. Even the engine sound seemed to fade, although the tack needle still moved normally. The compass stopped spinning. It showed N. Then the letter slowly rotated sideways on the display, not changed to another direction. The actual letter N turned like the screen image was twisting. Marin grabbed my arm. The air outside the windshield looked wrong. The salt ahead had turned pale gray in the fading light, but a wide oval area maybe 50 yards in front of us shimmered slightly. No object. No fog. Just a patch of air that bent the horizon behind it. I slowed without meaning to. The small light that had been along the horizon now appeared above that shimmer. Closer. Still silent. Still white. It hung low, maybe 20 or 30 feet above the salt. But every time I tried to focus on its edges, my eyes slid off it. It looked like a bright reflection seen in a curved mirror. I stopped the car. Marin whispered, "Don't." I didn't know if she meant don't stop or don't go closer. The clock on the dashboard read 8:17. The sun was almost gone, but not fully. A thin orange line remained above the mountains. The light ahead brightened slightly. The interior of the car filled with a weak white glow. No shadows, though. That bothered me. If light shined through the windshield, there should have been shadows behind the seats and under the dashboard. Instead, everything was evenly lit, like the light came from inside the air. The smell of hot metal got stronger. Then came a tapping sound underneath the car. One tap, then another near Marin's feet. She pulled her legs up onto the seat. The tapping moved slowly from the front passenger side toward the rear. Tap, 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 tap. I put the car in reverse and pressed the gas. Nothing happened. The engine made no sound now. The tack needle sat at 0, but I hadn't turned it off. The dashboard stayed lit. The compass display went blank. The radio screen showed a row of tiny lines. Marin started crying quietly, not loud, just this small panicked breathing with tears on her face. I reached for her hand. The second I touched her, the white light outside dimmed. The engine came back, loud and sudden. The car lurched backwards so hard, both of us jerked against our seatbelts. I hit the brake. The light ahead was gone. Not moved. Gone. The sun had fully set. That was impossible. Seconds earlier, there had still been orange above the mountains. Now, the sky was dark blue-black, with only a dull line of afterglow near the horizon. Marin stared out the windshield. "What time is it?" The dashboard clock said 9:06. Neither of us spoke for a while. The compass came back on and showed SW normally. No spinning, no glitch. The radio stayed off. Wind returned outside, pushing fine salt dust across the flats in thin sheets. I could hear it rushing around the car. I turned in what I hoped was east and drove. This time, the Subaru moved normally. Within maybe 5 minutes, headlights appeared far ahead, then another pair. Finally, I could see the road, the little access area, and a couple of parked cars with people packing up tripods. It all looked normal. Marin kept saying, "We lost almost an hour." I didn't answer because I was trying not to think about it. When we reached the paved access road, I stopped near the restrooms under a yellow security light. My hands were shaking so badly I had trouble putting the car in park. Marin got out immediately and bent over with her hands on her knees, breathing hard. I walked around the car because something smelled wrong again. The Subaru was coated in a thin white crust, not normal salt dust from driving on the flats. This looked wet, almost sprayed on. It covered the hood, windshield, roof, and even the side mirrors in fine speckled layers. The headlights were the worst. Both lenses were filmed over with pale residue thick enough to blur the beams. I rubbed one with my sleeve. The salt came away damp and gritty. Under it, the plastic headlight cover felt warm. Not warm from bulbs. Too warm for that. The whole front bumper felt warm too, while the back of the car was cold. Marin called my name. She stood behind the Subaru looking down. Our tire tracks led up to the pavement from the flats, but just before the road, they did something strange. 4 clean tracks ran straight toward the car like normal, then broke apart into circular scuffed patterns, as if the car had turned in place several times without moving forward. But we hadn't. The salt there was darker too, wet. In the middle of the circles sat 2 long, narrow grooves, about 3 feet apart, pressed deep into the surface. They didn't match tires. They didn't match anything under the Subaru either. I crouched near them. The grooves smelled strongly metallic. Mixed into the wet salt were tiny translucent flakes. I picked one up, and it crumbled into powder between my fingers almost immediately. Marin checked her camera while I stood there. Most of the photos from before sunset were fine. The flats, the sky, me standing like an idiot by the car. Then there were 13 black photos. Not underexposed. Black. After those, there was one image neither of us remembered taking. It showed the inside of the car from the back seat, both of us in front, facing forward. The windshield completely white. Marin's head turned slightly toward me. My hands on the wheel, and between our seats, reflected faintly in the rearview mirror, there was a pale oval light hanging somewhere behind us, where the back window should have shown only dark flats. We deleted it right there under the security light. Or thought we did. The next morning, back at the motel, it was still on the camera, but the timestamp had changed, said 8:17 p.m., the exact minute the car compass stopped. I worked nights at a hospital outside Scranton for almost 7 years. Not a huge hospital, but big enough to have multiple parking lots, old wings nobody liked walking through after midnight, and enough fluorescent lighting to make every hallway feel tired. This happened in February, near the end of a long stretch of freezing rain. I had worked 3 12s in a row on the med-surg floor, and by the time my shift ended that morning, I felt hollowed out, the kind of tired where you clock out and barely remember walking to the elevator. It was a little after 6:30 a.m., but the sky still looked like night. Low clouds, mist in the air, wet pavement reflecting the hospital lights. Sunrise was technically coming, but it hadn't reached us yet. Everything outside had that gray-blue color that makes snowbanks and buildings look flat. I left through the employee entrance near the east wing because it was closest to where I parked. That part of the hospital was older. Brick walls, narrow loading dock, oxygen tanks behind a cage, old ambulance bay they didn't use much anymore. Most employees avoided that lot because the lighting was bad and it was farther from security. But night shift parked there anyway when the main lot filled up. I remember stepping outside and immediately smelling wet asphalt and exhaust from the generators. The air was cold enough that I pulled my jacket tighter around my scrubs. At first, everything looked normal. A few employees walking toward their cars, a cafeteria worker smoking near the loading dock, steam coming from roof vents, the hum of hospital machinery behind the walls. Then I noticed the cars. Not all of them, just one section of the lot near the back fence. Every car window in that area was fogged over. From the outside, it took a second for that to register because car windows fog all the time in winter. But these looked different. The fog sat heavy and white on the exterior glass, thick enough that the windows looked painted. Windshields, side windows, rear windows, all of them coated evenly. The cars closer to the hospital were clear. Mine was in that fogged section. I stopped halfway down the sidewalk and stared. The mist in the air wasn't heavy enough to explain it, and the cars didn't have frost on them, just fogged wet glass like someone had breathed across every window at once. A woman from Respiratory Priya walked past me carrying a coffee and said, "You good?" I pointed toward the back row. She glanced over. "Huh, weird." Then she kept walking because she was tired too, and weird things around hospitals get ignored if they're not actively on fire. I almost walked with her to the main lot and called my husband for a ride, but that felt stupid. My car was right there. Maybe warm air from a vent or steam line had collected in that corner. That was my first explanation. There were underground utility lines all over the campus. Sometimes steam came up from grates when it was cold. So I walked toward my car. The closer I got, the quieter it seemed. The hospital behind me still made noise. Doors sliding, carts rattling, someone laughing near the entrance. But each step toward the back row made those sounds feel farther away, like I was walking underwater. I noticed the key fob didn't work when I was about 20 feet from my car. I pressed unlock. Nothing. No chirp, no flash from the lights. I pressed it again while walking. Nothing. I thought the battery in the fob died. Annoying, but not terrifying yet. Then I heard a soft hum from somewhere above me, not electrical like a transformer. Lower than that. It seemed to come from the hospital roofline behind the older east wing. I looked up. There was a faint light hanging above the roof. Pale white. Not bright like a helicopter searchlight. Not blinking like a plane. Just this soft shape above the edge of the building, maybe 20 or 30 feet over the roof. The clouds were low and gray behind it, but the light sat in front of them. Or maybe inside them. It was hard to tell. It didn't move. Steam from the roof vents drifted sideways in the cold air. But the pale light stayed perfectly still. I stood there with my fob in my hand, feeling the kind of confused you get right before fear decides what to do. I pressed unlock again without looking away from it. Nothing. The light over the roofline dimmed slightly, then brightened back to the same soft white. The hum through the lot deepened for a second. All the fogged car windows in that back section seemed to pulse faintly with reflected light. I know that sounds dramatic. It wasn't bright. It was subtle enough that I wasn't sure I saw it until it happened twice. I looked around for other people. Nobody was close now. Priya's car pulled out near the front of the lot. A security cart moved slowly near the main entrance, too far away to see me clearly. The back row where I stood felt separated from everything else. I walked to my driver's door and tried the fob right beside it. Nothing. I pulled the physical key from inside the fob and unlocked the door manually. The lock turned, but the door wouldn't open, not stuck from ice. It moved a fraction and stopped, like something inside held it. I tugged again harder. Still nothing. The outside of my window was fogged completely white. I wiped it with my sleeve. The moisture smeared but didn't clear right away. It left streaks in 3 long curves across the glass. That made me stop, because through the smear before the fog closed back in, I thought I saw something inside my car. Not a person, just a darker shape in the passenger seat. I leaned closer. The window fogged back over from the outside in a slow crawling way, like breath spreading across glass. I stepped back from the car so fast my heel slid on wet pavement. The hum stopped. Complete silence fell around that corner of the lot. No generators, no idling engines, no hospital air handlers, just silence. The pale light above the east wing remained. Then every car in the fogged section clicked at once, not unlocked, not alarms, just one sharp click from each vehicle, almost perfectly together. I froze with my back against the front fender of a silver SUV. A second later, the parking lot lights flickered, only the lights above our section. The rest of the lot stayed normal. During the flicker, I saw the cars around me differently for maybe half a second. Their windows weren't just fogged. The moisture on them had patterns, long vertical streaks, some curved, some stopped halfway down like something had dragged wet fingers across the glass and lifted away. Then the lights steadied, and the patterns were harder to see. I smelled something sharp then. Wet metal. Almost like when an elevator motor overheats, mixed with rainwater in a stairwell. I tried calling security. My phone had no service. That made no sense. Hospital campus had boosters everywhere because doctors complained if phones dropped calls. I held the phone higher. Nothing. Battery at 5%. It had been at 60 when I clocked out. I looked back at the hospital entrance and considered just walking inside. That was when I noticed the distance looked wrong. The employee entrance should have been maybe 80 yards away. Now it looked farther. Not impossible, far, just wrong enough that my stomach tightened. The sidewalk seemed stretched between me and the doors. The lights along it repeated in a way I didn't remember. Same puddle shape, same cigarette butt near the curb, same yellow cone by the loading dock. I had walked that path hundreds of times. It wasn't that long. The pale light over the roof shifted sideways, very slowly. As it moved, the windows on the east wing reflected it in delayed little flashes, one after another, though the light itself remained dim. Then I heard tapping from the car beside me. 3 soft taps on the inside of its rear passenger window. Tap, tap, tap. I turned my head slowly. The SUV was empty. At least it should have been. Its windows were fogged white like the others, but near the rear passenger glass, a small clear circle appeared, not wiped from outside, cleared from inside, darkness behind it. Then the circle clouded over again. I backed away into the driving lane. My shoes splashed in a shallow puddle, and the sound seemed delayed, like it reached my ears after my foot already lifted. The hum returned, lower now. I felt it through the pavement and up my legs. The light above the hospital roof brightened slightly. Every fogged window around me began to drip upward. That was the thing that finally pushed me into real panic. Not the light, not the fob, the condensation. Tiny beads of water on windshields and side glass rolled upward toward the roofs of the cars, slowly but clearly, against gravity, gathering into streaks that climbed instead of fell. I turned and started walking fast toward the employee entrance. The key fob hung useless from my hand. Behind me, something scraped across my driver's window, long and slow. I didn't look back. The hum grew louder for maybe 5 seconds, and my chest felt tight, like I was standing next to a huge speaker with the bass turned up. Then the parking lot lights went out, only in my section. The rest of the lot stayed lit, but around me everything dropped into cold gray darkness, lit only by the pale glow above the roofline. I stopped because I couldn't see the curb clearly. That was when I realized the hospital door wasn't ahead anymore. The back fence was. I had somehow turned around, or the lot had. I don't know how else to say it. The chain link fence stood 20 feet in front of me, wet and dark, with empty woods beyond it. My car was behind me to the left. The hospital sat somewhere over my shoulder now, even though I had been walking directly toward it. I looked down at my feet. The pavement was wet around me in an oval shape, dry elsewhere. Just one damp oval where I stood, rainwater or condensation collecting beneath my shoes. The hum stopped again. From the corner of my eye, I saw someone standing between 2 cars. A tall shape, too still. I turned toward it, nothing there except fogged windows and pale reflections. Then my phone lit up in my hand. No call, no notification, just the lock screen. 6:44 a.m. The time looked normal for half a second, then it changed to 6:21. Then 6:44 again. Then the screen went black. The pale light above the roofline drifted upward slightly. The hospital lights in the far windows flickered from floor to floor. I heard a voice behind me say my name. Lena. Not loud, not whispered, just spoken in a flat voice from somewhere near the cars. It sounded like my own voice, but played badly through a speaker. I ran. I don't remember deciding to run, I just did. I ran toward the hospital, even though I wasn't fully sure where it was anymore. The lot stretched wrong around me. Rows seemed longer than before. Cars repeated. I passed the same white van twice, with the same dent near the rear bumper and the same fogged windshield. My shoes slapped wet pavement. No echo. No breath in my ears. Just the hum in my pulse and that pale light hanging above the roof wherever I looked. Then I stepped out of the fogged section. The world snapped back. Hospital noise rushed in all at once. Engines, sliding doors, a helicopter somewhere far off, someone laughing near the entrance. My key fob chirped in my hand. My car unlocked behind me. I stopped so hard I almost fell. The fob chirped again because my thumb was still pressing the button. I looked back. The fogged section of cars sat maybe 30 yards away, normal distance now. The windows were still fogged, but not as thick. The pale light above the east wing was gone, just low clouds and roof vents. I stood there, bent over, breathing hard, while a security guard in a golf cart rolled up and asked if I was okay. His name was Harlan. I knew him from nights. I said my fob wasn't working and something was wrong with the lot. He looked toward the back row. Fog? I didn't answer. He offered to drive me to my car, and I said yes because I didn't want to walk back there alone. As we got closer in the cart, my fob kept working normally. Chirp, chirp, lights flashing on my car. The doors opened fine. Inside, the car was empty, no shape in the passenger seat. But the passenger seat felt damp when I touched it, not soaked, just cold and wet across the fabric. Harlan told me maybe I'd left the window cracked. I hadn't. All windows were sealed. He stood there while I started the engine. The dashboard clock said 7:12. I stared at it. I had clocked out around 6:30. The walk to my car should have taken 5 minutes. Even with everything that happened, it felt like maybe 10. My phone rebooted in the cup holder by itself. 7:12. Battery at 31%. No missed calls, no alerts. Just normal. I drove home in silence. When I pulled into my apartment lot, I noticed the car windows had cleared except for one spot on the passenger side. A small oval patch of fog remained on the outside of the glass, perfectly smooth around the edges. I wiped it with a napkin and fine white grit came off with the moisture. It smelled faintly metallic. I slept until late afternoon. When I woke up, I had a voicemail from Priya. She asked if I had made it home okay, then said something weird happened to her car too. Her windshield had fogged from outside while she was driving away, and her dashboard clock reset at 6:44. I called her back. She told me 3 other people from night shift mentioned their key fobs not working in the east lot that morning. One aide said she saw a light over the roof, but thought it was a helicopter behind the clouds. Another nurse said all the windows in her car were wet inside, and her badge stopped scanning at the employee entrance until she walked through a different door. The hospital never sent out an explanation. Facilities blamed weather. Security said a transformer had flickered near the east wing, even though no alarms showed a power issue. 2 days later, I had another night shift. I parked in the main lot. During my break around 3 a.m., I went to the 7th floor family waiting room because it overlooked the east side of the hospital. The lot looked normal under yellow lights, but on the roof of the old wing, near the vents, something pale moved behind the steam. Not hovering this time, lower, close to the roof surface. A soft white oval sliding slowly along the roofline before stopping above the employee entrance. I watched it for maybe 10 seconds, then every car alarm in the east lot chirped once together. Not full alarms, just one brief unlock sound, all at the same time. The light faded into the steam. When I got back to the nurse's station, the wall clock was 23 minutes behind the computer. I was 16 when this happened, living in a town outside Toledo where everything closed early except the gas station and one pizza place by the high school. I didn't have a car yet, so I walked everywhere. My parents both worked weird shifts, and nobody worried much if I came home late as long as I texted. This was in late April, after one of those heavy spring storms that rolled through fast and left everything steaming afterward. It had rained hard for almost an hour around dinner. Streets flooded at the curbs, gutters overflowed. Then the storm moved east and the sky cleared just enough for the clouds to glow gray-purple after dark. I'd been at my friend Devin's house playing video games with him and his brother. I left around 10:40 because my mom texted that she wanted me home before 11. The air smelled like wet grass and mud. Water still ran along the edges of the road in little streams carrying leaves and cigarette butts, and those white flowers that dropped from the trees near the library. The fastest way home was cutting behind the middle school, across the practice field, and then past the storm drain at the bottom of Briar Court. Everybody knew that storm drain. It was this big concrete tunnel where runoff from the neighborhood emptied into the creek behind the baseball diamonds. Not huge enough to stand up in, but big enough for kids to dare each other to crawl inside. There was a rusted metal grate over part of it, but one side had been bent open for years. I never liked that spot at night, not because of anything supernatural. It just sat down in this low patch with trees around it, and even in summer it stayed colder there. Water always dripped somewhere inside the tunnel, even when it hadn't rained in days. That night, because of the storm, the ditch beside it was full and moving fast. I came down the sidewalk with my hood up even though the rain had stopped. My shoes were soaked from crossing the school field, and I remember being annoyed because my mom would complain about mud on the carpet. I was maybe half a block from the storm drain when I noticed light in the trees. At first, I thought someone had a flashlight down there. Kids sometimes hung around the drain, smoking or trying to scare people. I slowed down, listening for voices. Nothing, just water running. Then I saw the glow leaking from the tunnel. Soft white light, not bright like a flashlight beam. More like the inside of the concrete pipe had a low bulb hidden around a corner. It spread faintly across the ditch water and touched the wet grass near the opening. I stopped on the sidewalk. The tunnel should have been dark. There were no lights down there. No power, no utility box, just concrete and water and weeds. I looked around for someone nearby. The houses on Briar Court were mostly dark except for porch lights. One TV flickered blue in a living room window. Farther up the road, a car passed without slowing. The glow stayed inside the storm drain. I told myself it was probably reflection from headlights somewhere. But the road was empty now, and the light didn't move like headlights. It stayed steady, low, and pale inside the tunnel. The air smelled different near the ditch. Rain, mostly, but underneath that was something sharp. Hot metal, like when you touch an old radiator or smell a power tool burning out. I pulled my phone out. It showed 10:48, battery at 32%. I opened the camera and aimed it toward the tunnel. The screen looked darker than real life. The glow barely showed up, just a gray smear near the drain opening. I hit record anyway. Right after I did, the water inside the ditch changed. The runoff had been flowing normally from the street toward the creek. Fast, muddy, full of little bubbles. But near the mouth of the drain, the surface started pulsing outward in circles. Not ripples from something falling, steady pulses. One ring after another spreading from inside the tunnel and pushing against the current. I lowered the phone slowly. The glow inside the drain brightened a little. I could see wet concrete now, the inside wall of the pipe, a thin line of water flowing along the bottom, the bent metal grate casting a crooked shadow. There was nothing in there, at least nothing I could see. Then something tapped inside the tunnel. 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. The sound was light, but it carried through the concrete perfectly, like someone tapping a fingernail against the inside wall. I said, "Devin?" I don't know why. Devin was at home. I had just left him. Nobody answered. The pulses in the water continued. The glow didn't flicker. I should have walked away right then, and I knew that even at the time. But there was this stupid teenage part of me that didn't want to run from a drainage pipe. It felt embarrassing, even though nobody was watching. So I stepped off the sidewalk and walked down the wet grass toward it. The ground squished under my shoes. Mud sucked at the soles. The smell got stronger with each step. Rain and hot metal. By the time I was 10 feet from the tunnel, the air felt warmer. Not outside warm. Specific warm, like heat coming out of the drain. The creek behind it was full and loud, but the sounds seemed distant now. The whole area had gone quiet in a weird way. No insects, no frogs, no dogs barking from the houses, only the water pulses from inside the pipe. I stood near the edge of the ditch and looked in. The tunnel went back maybe 30 or 40 feet before curving right. The glow came from beyond that bend, which made it softer and stranger. It lit the inner wall unevenly, like the light source wasn't sitting still, even though the glow itself didn't move. Then I noticed the water wasn't flowing out of the tunnel anymore. It should have been. After a storm, water poured from that pipe into the ditch for hours. But inside the tunnel, the shallow stream along the bottom sat almost flat. The ripples pulsed outward across it from beyond the bend. 1, 2, 3, always the same spacing. I leaned closer trying to see around the curve. My phone buzzed in my hand. The screen showed no service. That wasn't normal. That neighborhood had fine signal. I raised it, looked at the bars, and watched the battery jump from 32% to 9. Then the camera stopped recording by itself. The screen went black. I pressed the power button. Nothing happened. I remember feeling suddenly more alone than I had felt before. It sounds dumb because I was in a neighborhood maybe 50 yards from people sleeping in houses, but the whole street felt far away, like the ditch had separated from everything else. The tapping came again, this time not from deep in the pipe, from the bent metal grate right in front of me. Tap, tap, tap. I jumped backward and slipped in the mud, catching myself with one hand on the grass. The grate didn't move. Nothing touched it. The white glow started fading, slowly at first. It dimmed behind the curve, leaving the pipe darker and flatter. Then it went out completely. The storm drain became black. I stared into it, breathing hard. The water inside kept pulsing. That was worse somehow. The light had gone, but those rings still pushed outward from the bend, steady as a heartbeat. I got up and back toward the sidewalk. Halfway there, I heard something from inside the tunnel. Not tapping, a dragging sound, slow, wet, and soft, like something being pulled across concrete. It came from beyond the curve, then stopped. The pulses kept going. I didn't wait after that. I turned and started walking fast toward home. At the top of the ditch, I looked back once. The storm drain was dark. The ditch water moved normally again in the moonless gray light. Everything seemed normal except for the silence. Then the streetlights flickered. Not all of them, just the two closest to Briarcourt. They dimmed together, came back, then dimmed again. During that second dimming, I saw a pale reflection appear on the flooded edge of the road. A small oval of white light sliding along the gutter toward me. I looked up. Nothing above the street. No plane, no drone, no flashlight beam. The reflection kept moving through the shallow water at the curb. I walked faster. The reflection kept pace, staying maybe 15 feet behind and to my right. I tried not to look at it, but I could see it in puddles as I passed them. Each puddle caught that same pale oval for half a second, even though there was still nothing in the sky. The hot metal smell followed me up the street. My house was only 3 blocks away. I started jogging. The neighborhood looked wrong as I moved through it. Not completely different, just slightly off. Porch lights seemed dimmer than usual. The same parked silver minivan appeared on 2 different blocks. I passed a basketball hoop lying on its side, then passed it again a minute later, even though I was sure I hadn't circled. My phone finally turned back on in my hand. 10:49. Only 1 minute had passed since I reached the drain. That made me slow down, confused. There was no way. I'd stood there at least 5 minutes, maybe more. The phone battery showed 23% now. Still no service. Then a notification appeared, a text from my mom. "Where are you?" The timestamp said 11:17. I stopped under a streetlight and stared at it. My phone still said 10:49 at the top. The message said 11:17. I tried calling her, but the call failed immediately. The air grew warm around me again, just like near the storm drain. I heard water, not from the gutters, from under the street. A rushing sound below the pavement, louder than it should have been, and like the drains underneath me were suddenly full and moving fast. Then came that same pulse. Not something I heard exactly. Something I felt through the soles of my wet shoes. 1, 2, 3. The streetlight above me hummed. I looked down and saw the puddle at the curb ripple outward from the storm grate beside it. Another storm drain there, smaller, just a curb inlet with dark water inside. A soft white glow appeared behind the bars. I stepped backward into the street. The glow inside the curb drain brightened enough that I saw wet leaves pressed against the grate. Then something behind those leaves moved. Not an animal. Not clearly. Just a darker shape passing through pale light. I ran. I ran the rest of the way home without looking back. My shoes slapped wet pavement. My backpack bounced against my shoulders. Somewhere behind me, a dog finally started barking, then another, but their barks sounded muffled and far away. When I turned onto my street, everything snapped back at once. The air got cold again. The smell vanished. The sound of traffic from the main road returned. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my hand, filling with missed texts from my mom. I nearly ran into our front door trying to unlock it. Inside, the house felt too bright and normal. Kitchen light on, TV playing low in the living room. My mom standing near the counter, holding her phone with that angry, scared face parents get. She started yelling before I even got my shoes off. I didn't answer. I looked at the microwave clock. 11:24. My phone now matched it. 11:24. I had left Devon's at 10:40. The walk home should have taken 15 minutes. Even stopping at the drain, it shouldn't have been almost 45. My mom asked why I was soaked. I told her I slipped. She asked why I didn't answer her calls. I told her my phone died. That part was sort of true and sort of not. When I took my shoes off, water poured out of them onto the tile. Not just damp socks, actual water, brown and gritty like I'd stepped into the ditch deeper than I remembered. My left sleeve was muddy up to the elbow from where I'd caught myself, but the back of my hoodie had mud on it too. A long wet smear across my shoulder blades. I hadn't fallen backward. My mom noticed it and asked what I got into. I said I didn't know. I showered and went to bed, but I didn't sleep much. Every time the house pipes made noise, I thought of the storm drain. Every drip from the bathroom sink sounded spaced out like those pulses in the water. The next morning, I checked my phone for the video. It was there. Sort of. The clip was 11 seconds long. It showed me walking toward the drain, the flashlight from my phone bouncing over wet grass and concrete. The glow didn't show up except as a pale smudge near the tunnel opening. At the end of the clip, the camera angled down toward the ditch water. For maybe 2 seconds, the ripples pulsed outward exactly how I remembered. Then the audio cut completely. The last frame froze on the dark tunnel, but there was something in the image I hadn't seen the night before. On the left side of the tunnel wall, just inside the opening, 3 wet marks ran down the concrete, long and narrow, too high to be from my hand. I deleted the video before school. Then I checked recently deleted and deleted it again. I still don't know why, I just didn't want it on my phone. After school, I walked home the long way. I avoided Briar Court for almost 2 weeks, but eventually curiosity got to me and I went back in daylight after another rainy morning. The storm drain looked normal. Brown water trickled through it. Trash caught on the bent grate. Mosquitoes hovered near the ditch. A squirrel ran across the grass like nothing had ever happened there. I stood on the sidewalk, not going any closer. Then I noticed something in the mud near the tunnel opening. My footprints from that night were long gone, washed away by more rain. But there were marks beside the concrete lip, not footprints. 3 narrow grooves in the mud, evenly spaced, curving from the tunnel toward the grass. They stopped after about 4 feet, no tracks leading back. No body prints, nothing else. I looked into the tunnel, dark, normal. Then the water inside pulsed once, just once. A single ring pushed outward from beyond the bend and spread through the shallow stream. The air smelled like rain and hot metal again for maybe 3 seconds, then it was gone. I was hiking in the Angeles National Forest when this happened, on one of the smaller trails north of La Cañada that doesn't get much attention unless the main lots are full. It was late October, cool but dry, and the whole area still smelled faintly burned from a fire that had come through a few years before. I'd gone out after work because I was trying to clear my head. That was dumb, looking back, because I didn't start hiking until almost 5, and sunset came fast in those canyons. The trail I took was an old service path that climbed along a ridge, crossed a dry creek bed, then met a fire road near the top. I'd done it before during the day. Nothing technical, mostly chaparral, scattered pines, loose rock, and those steep drops that make you pay attention even when you're tired. I planned to turn around at the fire road gate. That gate sat where the public trail met an old locked access road. Big yellow metal bar across the road, chain and padlock in the middle, Forest Service sign warning about unauthorized vehicles. I remembered it clearly because I'd taken a picture there once. By the time I reached it that evening, the sky had gone purple-gray behind the ridge. Not dark yet, but close. The kind of twilight where every shadow looks deeper than it should. I could still see without my headlamp, so I kept it off. The first strange thing was the quiet. Usually there was some sound in that area. Distant traffic from the highway below, birds settling down, wind moving through dry brush. That evening, the canyon had gone still. It's not peaceful still, more like everything was holding its breath. Then I saw the gate. It was open, not just cracked, swung wide across the dirt shoulder. The chain hung loose from one side and the padlock dangled from it. I stopped maybe 15 feet away and stared at it. That gate was never open. I'd seen mountain bikers climb around it, hikers squeeze past it, even one guy lift his dog over it, but I had never seen it unlocked. At first, I thought maintenance crews were up there. Maybe someone had forgotten to close it. Then I looked beyond the gate. The fire road stretched into trees, curving downhill through a darker section of canyon. No tire tracks looked fresh. No parked trucks. No voices, no engine noise, just the open gate sitting there in twilight. I told myself to turn around. Instead, I walked closer. The metal gate creaked softly even though there wasn't any wind. I reached for the chain and felt the weirdest little vibration through it, like a phone buzzing very far away. I pulled my hand back. The chain looked normal, dusty and rusted around the links. I checked the padlock. Still locked. That took me a second to understand. The lock was closed through one link of the chain, but the chain wasn't wrapped around the gate properly anymore. It hung loose, like someone had somehow slid it free without unlocking it. I stood there trying to picture how that could happen. That was when I noticed the smell. Rain and hot metal. There hadn't been rain for weeks. Everything around me was dry enough to crumble under my boots. But the air beyond the gate smelled damp and sharp, like pavement after a storm mixed with overheated tools. I stepped past the gate onto the fire road, only a few steps. I wasn't planning to go far. I just wanted to see if a truck was parked around the bend. The dirt road had old tire ruts hardened into it, dry leaves gathered along the edges, tall weeds grew between tracks. No sign anybody had driven there recently. Then a light appeared deeper in the trees, pale white, low to the ground, moving slowly between the trunks. I froze immediately. My first thought was headlights from a vehicle coming up the fire road. But it didn't look like headlights. No paired beams, no glare, no bouncing over ruts, just one soft light drifting sideways through the trees. And there was no engine, no crunching tires, no voices. The light moved steadily behind the brush, maybe 200 yards ahead, sometimes hidden by trunks, sometimes visible in gaps. It wasn't bright enough to light the road properly. It only touched the edges of leaves and branches closest to it, giving them a dull white outline. I backed up until my heel hit the metal gate behind me. The gate moved slightly with a low scrape. The light stopped. I stopped too. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the light drifted closer. Not fast. Not directly down the road either. It moved through the trees to the left of the road, parallel to it, like someone carrying a lantern without walking. Still no footsteps. I finally pulled out my phone. No service. That wasn't unusual in the canyon, but the battery showed 12%. It had been over 70 when I left the car. I remember because I checked it before starting. I turned on the camera anyway. The screen showed the road, the trees, the dim sky. The light didn't appear. In real life, it was clear. On the screen, there was only darkness between trunks. That was when I got truly uneasy. I lowered the phone and the light was still there. Closer now. Maybe 100 yards. The air around me warmed suddenly, just a little. Enough that I noticed because my arms had been cold a minute earlier. My breath stopped fogging, though the evening temperature hadn't changed. Then the gate behind me creaked again. Not from my body touching it. It swung a few inches wider. Slowly. The chain dragged over metal with a dry, scraping sound. I turned around. The trail I'd come from looked darker than before. The bend downhill was only maybe 20 yards away, but beyond it the path disappeared into thick shadow. I could see the outline of a burned tree stump near the trail edge. I remembered passing it on the way up. The light behind me moved again. I turned back. It was now at the edge of the road. Not on the road. At the edge. Hovering waist-high above the scrub. Pale, soft, oval-shaped. There was something darker inside it, but every time I tried to look directly at that center, my eyes felt like they slipped away from it. I whispered, "Hello?" The sound of my voice dropped flat into the air. No echo. No carry. The light didn't react. Then somewhere down the fire road, a rock clicked. A single small sound. Another rock clicked near the opposite side of the road. Then another behind me. The sounds came one at a time, spaced out, like someone walking around me in a wide circle, but only stepping on stones. I raised my phone again, mostly for the flashlight. The flashlight wouldn't turn on. I tapped the icon. Nothing. The screen dimmed and showed the battery at 3%. Then the phone shut off in my hand. The pale light drifted another few feet toward the road. The brush nearest it began to move. That was the part that made my legs feel weak. There was no wind. Nothing else moved. But the dry branches around the light bent inward toward it slowly, like something unseen was pulling them. The old leaves on the ground lifted slightly, not flying, just trembling. I stepped backward through the open gate. The second I crossed back to the trail side, the air got cold again. Normal cold. I kept backing away. The light remained beyond the gate, steady and silent. Then I heard a voice from the fire road. Not loud, not clear. It sounded like someone speaking through a wall. I couldn't make out words, but the rhythm was calm, almost conversational. I called out again, "Who's there?" The voice stopped. The light dimmed. For a few seconds I thought it was going away. Then there was a sharp metallic bang behind me. I spun around. The gate had swung shut. Not all the way, but halfway, moving without wind. The chain dragged along the dirt. I stumbled backward onto the trail and almost fell. The pale light brightened again behind the bars. Now it sat directly in the road beyond the gate, low and still. The forest around it looked wrong in the fading light. The trunks seemed farther apart than they should have been. The road behind it stretched straight into darkness, even though I knew it curved sharply left after maybe 50 yards. My ears popped. A low hum started. Not loud, more like a vibration in my jaw. The gate began to shake very softly. The chain buzzed against the metal post. And then I saw something move behind the light. A tall shape, only for a second, dark against darker trees. It stood upright near the edge of the road, too still, too narrow. Then the light shifted and the shape disappeared behind it. That broke whatever stupid curiosity kept me there. I turned and started down the trail fast. Not running at first because loose rock on that trail could wreck your ankle, but fast enough that I slipped twice on the first switchback. The sky was almost gone now. The canyon below had filled with blue-black darkness. I pulled my headlamp from my pack and tried to switch it on. Nothing. I knew the batteries were good. I'd checked them that afternoon. I slapped the side of it, still dead. Behind me, the gate creaked. Long, slow, metallic. Then something tapped against it, 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't look back. The trail felt different going down. Longer. I knew every hiker says that when they panic, but this was more than nerves. I passed the same burned stump twice. Same shape, same twisted branch pointing over the trail. The second time I saw it, I stopped hard enough that gravel slid under my boots. I looked uphill. The gate was not visible. It should have been hidden by the bend, so that was normal. But ahead of me, the trail dipped into a stretch of trees I didn't remember at all. The service path should have dropped along open chaparral toward the creek bed. Instead, there were pines crowded close around the trail, their trunks black and vertical in the dim light. The air smelled like rain and hot metal again. I heard the hum behind me. Not from one direction, everywhere. I started jogging. Branches brushed my sleeves. My boots hit loose dirt and stones. The trail curved left, then right, then left again, but none of it matched what I remembered from the hike up. Then I saw the pale light through the trees below me. Not behind, ahead. It moved slowly between trunks, parallel to the trail, still silent. I stopped and crouched without thinking, like that would hide me. The light continued drifting. No engine, no footsteps, no crunch of leaves. The branches nearest it bent inward as it passed. Then it stopped. I stayed completely still. A warm patch of air moved over me. That is the only way I can explain it. I was crouched on cold dirt, and suddenly the space around my face and chest became warm and damp, like standing near a dryer vent. It smelled strongly metallic. My ears rang. The hum deepened. Something moved on the trail behind me. A slow scrape over dirt. I turned my head enough to see, and the beam of pale light was gone from the trees. But there was a shape in the trail behind me. Low at first, then taller. For one awful second, I thought it was a person rising from a crouch. I bolted downhill. I didn't care about slipping anymore. I ran hard through dark trees, hands up in front of me, branches hitting my arms and face. Once my foot caught a root, and I went down on one knee, hard enough to tear my jeans. When I got up, the trail was normal again. Open chaparral, the creek bed below, the last faint strip of sky over the ridge. My headlamp suddenly clicked on by itself, shining a bright white circle onto the dirt in front of me. I froze. It stayed on. Behind me, the forest sounded normal again. Wind moved through dry brush. Insects clicked somewhere low. A distant car hissed along the road far below. I checked my phone. It turned on immediately. Battery at 46%. The time said 7:18 p.m. That made no sense. I had reached the gate around 6:30, maybe earlier. It felt like 10 minutes had passed since then. Maybe 15. But I should not have lost almost an hour. I kept moving. I didn't stop again until I reached the parking pullout where my car was. There were two other cars there now, though I had parked alone. One had a couple changing shoes near the trunk. They looked at me strangely because I was muddy and breathing hard. The woman asked if I was okay. I said I fell. My voice sounded weird, dry and hoarse. I got into my car and locked the doors. For a moment, I just sat there with the dome light on, trying to settle my hands enough to put the key in the ignition. That was when I noticed the dirt on my backpack. Fresh, damp dirt streaked across the back of it, not dust from falling, wet soil. 3 long marks dragged downward from the top flap toward the side pocket, like someone had pressed muddy fingers into it. The trail had been dry. Even where I fell, it was dry dirt and loose gravel. No mud. I reached back and touched the streaks. They smelled like rain and hot metal. I drove home without music, without stopping, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise and found leaves in my shoes. Not crushed leaves from the trail. Green pine needles. Fresh ones. There hadn't been pine trees on that trail except in the section I wasn't sure had been real. Later that week, I drove back in daylight because I needed to know about the gate. I didn't hike the whole trail. I took the paved forest road around to where the fire road access met a ranger turnout. The gate was there. Closed. Locked. Chain wrapped normally around both posts. Padlock secure. No sign it had been opened recently. I stood outside it for maybe 5 minutes looking through the bars at the road beyond. Everything looked ordinary in morning sun. Dust. Tire ruts. Brush. Then I noticed marks in the dirt just beyond the gate. Not tire tracks. A narrow, flattened path running from the center of the road into the trees. The brush along both sides leaned inward like something heavy had passed through without breaking it. And on the yellow metal gate, near where I had touched the chain, there was a dull, pale oval mark about the size of my palm. I rubbed it with my sleeve. Fine white powder came off onto the fabric. Underneath, the metal felt warm. I was taking the night ferry from Port Angeles to Victoria when this happened. It was late November, one of those cold, wet nights where the whole harbor looked like it had been rubbed with dirty glass. Rain had stopped right before boarding, but everything still dripped. Railings, windows, ropes, cars lined up below deck. I was going over to help my sister move out of her apartment. She'd been living in Victoria for a year and was coming back stateside after some job thing fell apart. I'd brought my old Honda because she had boxes, a bike, and more plants than any reasonable person should own. The ferry left around 9:30 p.m. It wasn't packed, but there were enough people that it felt normal at first. Families half asleep in booths, a couple of truck drivers talking near the vending machines, some college kids watching a movie on one laptop with the volume too low. That low ferry vibration ran through everything, like the whole vessel was one big humming appliance. I hate sitting inside on boats for too long, so after we got out past the harbor lights, I went up to the open deck. The wind hit hard immediately, cold and salty, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The deck was wet, and the lights overhead made little puddles shine along the painted metal floor. I zipped my jacket all the way up and walked to the starboard side, away from the few smokers standing near the back. The water was black except where the ferry lights broke it apart. Waves slapped the hull in uneven bursts. The sky was fully overcast, no stars, no moon. Just low clouds moving fast above us. I remember looking down at the waves and feeling that old, uncomfortable thought, everyone gets on a night crossing. There is a lot of dark water under this thing. For a while, nothing happened. I watched the foam peel away from the side of the ferry. I checked my phone once, but service was gone. Not surprising. I put it back in my pocket and just stood there, trying not to think about how tired I was. Then I saw the light. At first, it looked like a reflection in the waves, a white glow just above the water, maybe 50 yards out from the ferry. Not bright like a searchlight, more like a small round lamp wrapped in fog. It moved alongside us at the same speed, holding steady just above the waves. My first thought was another boat, but there were no navigation lights. No red, no green, no cabin lights, no outline of a hull. Just that white light hovering low above the water. I leaned over the rails slightly, trying to see if something underneath it cut through the waves. Nothing. The water below the light looked wrong, too. It didn't reflect the glow the way it should have. The waves stayed dark under it, except for a pale smear that slid across the tops of them, almost separate from the water. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed. The smokers had gone back inside. I was alone on that side of the deck. The light kept pace. I told myself it was probably a buoy, then immediately knew that didn't work because we were moving, and it was staying with us. Then I thought maybe it was a reflection from the ferry windows, but it sat too far out and held its position even when I shifted along the rail. I walked about 10 steps forward. The light stayed even with me. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I stopped near one of the orange life ring boxes and watched it. The ferry kept pushing forward through chop, but the light remained perfectly level, maybe 6 or 7 feet above the water. It didn't bob with the waves, it didn't sway with the wind, it didn't throw spray. The wind was still blowing hard then. My jacket snapped against my arms, my hair whipped across my forehead. The light didn't react at all. I stood there longer than I should have. I think I expected it to suddenly become normal if I watched carefully enough. A small boat, a reflection, a helicopter light behind low cloud, something. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, no notification. The screen was on, but the battery had dropped to 4%. It had been at 60-something when we boarded. The clock said 10:08. I tried opening the camera. The screen froze for a second, then showed the deck railing and black water. When I aimed at the light, the screen darkened almost completely. I could still see the white glow with my eyes, clear as anything, but on the phone it looked like a faint gray smudge. I hit record anyway. The phone shut off. That was when I noticed the wind had changed. Not died down slowly. Stopped. Completely. My jacket fell still against my body. The wet flag rope somewhere above me stopped slapping. The spray stopped touching my face. The water still moved and the ferry still cut through it, but the air on the open deck went dead. I could hear the engines below more clearly now, low and steady. Then even that sound seemed to drop away. The deck felt sealed off from everything else. I looked back toward the doors leading inside. Through the glass, I could see the lit passenger lounge. People sat at tables. A man walked past carrying coffee. Everything looked normal in there. Out on the deck, it felt like standing inside a held breath. The light over the waves brightened slightly, not enough to hurt my eyes, just enough that I could see something darker in the middle of it. A vertical shadow, maybe, or the absence of light. It was there for a second, then shifted and became impossible to focus on. The water beneath it began to flatten, only beneath it. The waves around the ferry kept rolling, but a smooth round patch formed under the glow, like oil spreading across the surface. The patch moved with the light, keeping pace beside us. I backed away from the rail. The metal deck under my shoes felt warm. I looked down because that made no sense. It had been cold and wet a second earlier, but the spot where I stood gave off a strange warmth through the soles of my sneakers. I moved 1 foot aside. Cold metal. I stepped back. Warm again. A smell came with it. Salt, obviously, but underneath that something sharp and familiar. Hot metal, like wet coins left on a radiator. I swallowed and looked toward the light again. It seemed closer. I hadn't seen it move toward us. It just occupied more space now, sitting maybe 30 yards out instead of 50. The glow stayed low above the waves, silent and steady. Then I heard tapping, not from the water, from the railing beside me. 3 soft taps. Tap, tap, tap. I jerked away so fast my shoulder hit the life ring box. The railing was empty. Wet metal, chipped paint, nothing else. I stared at it, waiting. The taps came again, this time from the deck beneath my feet, same spacing. Tap, tap, tap. I said hello because my brain was still trying to make it human somehow. My voice sounded wrong outside. Flat. Small. Like it didn't travel past my face. The pale light dimmed. For a second I thought it was finally leaving. Then it slid forward, matching the ferry's movement so smoothly that it looked like the whole ocean moved around it instead of it moving through the ocean. I turned and walked toward the door. I wasn't running yet. I didn't want to look crazy if someone inside happened to glance out. I just walked fast with my hand out toward the metal handle. Before I reached it, the door window fogged over. From the outside, white mist bloomed across the glass in one smooth spread, covering the view of the passenger lounge. The lights inside became blurred yellow shapes. I stopped. The air around me got warmer. The engine sounded farther away. I pressed my palm against the glass. Cold on my side. The fog on the outer surface shifted under my hand even though I hadn't touched it. 3 narrow, clear lines dragged downward through it slowly, then filled back in. I grabbed the handle and pulled. The door didn't move. It wasn't locked. Ferry deck doors aren't locked during crossings, and I had come through it minutes earlier. I pulled harder. Nothing. It felt like pressure held it shut from the other side. I looked back over my shoulder. The light was much closer now. 20 yards maybe less. The water directly below it remained flat and dark, no reflection, no proper shine, just a pale glow hanging above a smooth-moving circle in the waves. Then, from somewhere below deck, a car alarm chirped once. Just one short beep, then another, then several at once. The sound came faintly through the ferry structure, muffled by metal and distance. Beep, 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 beep. At first it was scattered, then it grew into a messy chorus of chirps from the vehicle deck below. Not full alarms blaring, just the quick lock-unlock chirps cars make when someone presses a fob. Dozens of them, all different tones. The wind returned at the exact same moment. It hit so hard the door pushed inward suddenly and I nearly fell backward as it opened. Cold air rushed around me. The lounge snapped back into focus through the clearing glass. Sound returned all at once, too. Engines. People talking. Dishes clinking somewhere inside. I stumbled through the door and let it slam behind me. A woman sitting nearby looked up from her book. "You okay?" I said. "Yeah, but it came out too fast." Below us, the car chirping continued. People started noticing now. Heads lifted. Someone near the windows said, "Is that the cars?" A deckhand came through from the stairwell with a radio clipped to his jacket. He looked annoyed at first, then confused. The chirping from below kept going, rising through the floor in waves. Someone laughed nervously and said maybe all the key fobs went off at once. Nobody else laughed. I looked back through the deck door window. The light outside was gone, just black water and spray under the ferry lights. The deckhand passed me and opened the door to look outside. Wind shoved against him immediately. He leaned out for a second, then came back in, shaking rain or spray from his hair. "Nothing out there," he said to no one in particular. But his face looked different after he said it. The chirping below stopped all at once, not gradually, just done. The lounge stayed quiet for a few seconds after that, like everyone expected it to start again. Then, conversation slowly came back. I sat near the window with my hands tucked under my arms because they wouldn't stop shaking. I kept looking outside, but I couldn't see anything past my own reflection and the black water beyond it. My phone turned on by itself about 10 minutes later. Battery at 29%. The time said 10:09. That didn't make sense because it had said 10:08 outside, before everything happened. I'd been out there long enough for more than 1 minute to pass. Even if I was wrong about how long, the rest of the crossing didn't line up either. An announcement came over the speakers around then. Just the captain apologizing for a brief electrical disturbance and saying the crossing would continue normally. Electrical disturbance. That was all. A man sitting across from me muttered, "That wasn't electrical." He was maybe 60, wearing a wool cap and a heavy work jacket. He had been looking out the window too, not at me exactly. I asked what he meant. He shook his head at first. Then he said, "The wind stopped." I didn't say anything. He looked at me then. "You felt it?" I nodded once. He stared down at his hands and said he had been standing on the aft deck when it happened. He said the gulls following the ferry vanished all at once, not flew away, just weren't there anymore when the wind dropped. Before I could ask more, the ferry lurched slightly, not enough to throw anyone over. Just a subtle shift, like the hull passed over a heavy wake. The man stopped talking immediately. Outside the window, the water looked normal. The rest of the crossing felt too long. People pretended it was fine because that's what people do in public. A few joked about their cars being haunted. Someone complained loudly about his alarm draining his battery. The crew moved around smiling politely, but they kept glancing at each other. When we finally docked, everyone went down to the vehicle deck. It smelled stronger down there than usual. Exhaust, salt water, wet rubber, but under it was that same hot metal smell I'd noticed on the open deck. Cars sat in tight rows, wet and shining under fluorescent lights. People started engines. Doors slammed. Everything seemed normal for maybe 30 seconds. Then drivers began noticing things. One woman's windshield was fogged from the outside in 3 perfect vertical streaks. A pickup truck near the ramp had every window rolled down exactly 1 inch. A black SUV's hazard lights blinked once, then stopped, even though no one was inside yet. My Honda was parked in the middle row. All 4 windows were clear except the rear passenger side. That one had a pale oval patch of moisture on the outside glass, smooth around the edges. No fingerprints, no drip marks, just an oval like breath on a mirror. I wiped it with my sleeve. Fine white grit came off with the moisture. It smelled like salt and pennies. Inside the car, my dashboard compass spun slowly. The engine wasn't on. The key wasn't in the ignition. The little digital display above the radio cycled through directions. N, N, E, E, C, S. It moved smoothly like the car was turning in circles. I opened the driver's door and sat down without starting the engine. The compass kept spinning. My hands felt cold again. Outside, cars began rolling forward toward the ramp. A crew member waved us along. The compass stopped suddenly on W, then went blank, then displayed the correct outside temperature like nothing had happened. I started the car. It turned over fine. As I drove off the ferry, a crew member near the ramp glanced at my rear window and then looked away quickly. I almost stopped to ask him what he saw, but cars behind me were moving and someone honked. I got to my sister's apartment around midnight. She came outside in sweatpants to help unload a few things and immediately asked why the car was covered in salt. I told her it was from the crossing. She frowned and rubbed the roof with 2 fingers. This is wet. The whole roof had a thin, gritty film across it, not normal road salt. It looked sprayed on like the car had been hit from above with ocean mist. But the cars on either side of me in the ferry line had been dry on top when we loaded. The rear passenger window still had a faint outline where the oval had been. Inside the car, the back seat was damp, not soaked, just cold and wet in one round patch. I drove home 2 days later in daylight. Before boarding the return ferry, I checked the Honda carefully. No moisture inside, compass normal, phone charged. I even took pictures of the rear seat and windows, though I felt ridiculous doing it. The return crossing was normal. Bright gray morning, rough water, kids running around the lounge, nothing strange. But when I got off in Port Angeles and stopped for gas, I opened the back door to grab my jacket. On the rear seat, in the exact damp spot from the first night, there was a line of tiny white crystals arranged in 3 short rows. Not spilled salt, not random. 3 rows, curved slightly toward the center. I brushed them into my palm. They dissolved almost instantly against my skin, leaving behind the smell of hot metal and seawater. My phone buzzed while I stood there beside the pump. No service notification. Then, a saved video appeared in my camera roll. I hadn't recorded anything successfully on the deck. The phone had died before it could save. The clip was 9 seconds long. Most of it was black water and the ferry railing, shaking in my hand. The white light hovered out above the waves, but on video it showed only as a smudge. At the very end, right before the screen went black, the audio cut out completely. In the silence, 3 car alarms chirped below deck. Then a voice said my name from very close to the microphone. It sounded like me. I worked seasonal lifeguard shifts on the New Jersey shore for 3 summers, mostly in a small town south of Long Beach Island. It wasn't the kind of beach with huge crowds and boardwalk rides. Just rental houses, dunes, 1 snack shack, and a beach patrol building that always smelled like sunscreen, wet rope, and old coffee. This happened near the end of August, right before Labor Day weekend. I had the early opening check that morning. That meant getting there before the rest of the crew, unlocking the patrol shack, checking the flags, looking for debris, making sure no overnight storms tore anything loose, and taking a quick scan of the water before swimmers showed up. It was still dark when I pulled into the beach lot. Not black dark exactly, more that gray hour before sunrise where shapes exist, but nothing has color yet. The air felt cool and sticky after a warm night. Low clouds covered most of the sky, and the wind was coming lightly from offshore, enough to move the dune grass, but not enough to make the flags snap. I remember the beach looking empty in a way that felt almost staged. No fishermen on the jetty, no joggers, no beachcombers with metal detectors, just smooth, damp sand and trash cans lined up near the access path. I unlocked the patrol shack around 5:12 a.m. I know the time because I signed into the clipboard like we always did. The little wall clock over the first aid cabinet was off by a few minutes, so I checked my phone and wrote that down instead. The radio batteries were in their charger on the counter. I grabbed one handheld, clicked it on, and did a quick test. Unit 3 checking radio. Static, then dispatch answered from the station farther north. Copy Unit 3. Everything normal. I got the rescue can and walked down toward the water line. The tide was coming in. Waves rolled steadily through the gray light, not huge, maybe waist-high, breaking clean and spreading foam over the sand. The ocean looked dark green-black past the break. I started my usual walk south along our section. Mostly I was checking for holes kids had dug the day before, broken glass, dead fish, anything that would be a problem when the public showed up. The whole beach smelled like salt and seaweed and damp wood from the dune fencing. Then I noticed one section of water beyond the break looked too smooth. At first I thought it was a rip current patch. Sometimes the water flattens where it pulls outward. That was normal enough that I stopped and looked at it with that in mind. But this was different. A round area, maybe 30 yards across, sat beyond the breaking waves, instead perfectly smooth while the rest of the ocean kept moving. Waves rolled in from both sides, lifted, broke, and collapsed. But inside that smooth patch, the surface stayed flat, like glass. I stood there for a few seconds trying to understand the shape of it. Then I saw the light above it. Pale white, soft, not high in the sky. It hovered maybe 20 or 30 feet above the water, out past the breakers. It wasn't bright enough to cast a beam or light up the beach, but it was easy to see against the low clouds. My first thought was a drone. Then I listened. No motor, no buzzing, no boat engine, no helicopter thump, nothing except the waves breaking closer to shore. The light didn't blink. It didn't sway. It stayed perfectly still over that smooth circle of ocean. I brought the radio up. Base, Unit 3, static. I waited. Nothing. I pressed again. Base, you copy? The radio popped once, then gave me a low hiss. I checked the channel. Same channel, battery full. The screen was on. I turned slightly toward town, thinking maybe my body or the dune line blocked signal somehow, which made no sense because I was standing in open sand. Base, radio check. No answer. The light over the water remained exactly where it was. I looked north toward the patrol building. It sat behind me, small and gray, near the dunes. The access road beyond it was empty. No one else had arrived. That was when the wind stopped. It had been light, but it was there. I'd felt it against my wet hair and heard it moving through the beach grass. Then it cut off. The flags near the shack hung still. The dune grass stopped moving. Even the fine sand blowing across the hard pack near my shoes dropped flat. The ocean kept making noise, but it sounded muted, like the waves were farther away than they actually were. I walked a few steps closer to the water. The smooth patch beyond the break stayed smooth. The light hovered above it, pale and steady. Then the smell changed. It wasn't just ocean anymore. There was something sharp underneath it. Hot metal, like a space heater burning dust, mixed with low tide smell. It came in one wave and made me wrinkle my nose. I tried the radio again. Nothing. Not even static this time. Just dead air. I checked my phone. No service. That was weird. The beach had weak signal sometimes, but not none. I looked at the battery and saw it had dropped to 7%. It had been in the high 80s when I left home because I charged it overnight. I put it away fast because I didn't like how that made me feel. The light seemed closer. I didn't see it move. I need to say that clearly. It never zipped forward or drifted in. It just looked closer every time I checked something else and looked back. Now I could see the smooth patch beneath it more clearly. The waves that should have passed through that spot simply didn't. They curled and broke around it like the water there belonged to a separate surface. Foam lines approached the edge and flattened out. Then they reappeared on the other side, distorted and thin. I had lifeguard training. I knew water did strange things, rips, sandbars, currents, offshore wind. I kept trying to put this into one of those boxes. It didn't fit. A dark shape moved under the smooth water. Not a fish, not a ray. Too large, too slow, and it didn't disturb the surface. I saw it pass beneath the pale circle once, broad and shadowy, then disappear under the darker chop beyond it. I backed up without meaning to. My heel hit a piece of driftwood and I nearly fell. The radio in my hand suddenly vibrated. Not sound, physical vibration, like a phone on silent. I looked down and saw the screen flickering between channel numbers too fast to read. Then a voice came through. Not dispatch, not anyone I knew. It sounded like somebody speaking from underwater through a bad speaker. Low, warped, and too calm. I couldn't catch words, only the shape of speech. I held the radio away from my face. The voice stopped. The light over the water dimmed slightly. The smooth patch widened. At the edge of the surf, water rushed around my shoes. Cold foam, normal movement. But about 10 feet in front of me, where the next wave should have broken, the surface dipped inward for a second, like something pulled the water down from below. Then it rose back. No splash, no spray, just down and back up. I remember saying, "Nope," under my breath. That was when the beach behind me went quiet, too. No gulls. I hadn't noticed them before because gulls are always part of the background there. But suddenly I realized I hadn't heard a single bird since I got to the waterline. No gulls, no terns, nothing. The beach should have been full of them before sunrise, picking through the tide line. The whole sky above the dunes was empty. I started walking backward toward the shack, slow at first. I didn't want to turn my back to the water. The light stayed over the smooth patch, still silent, still soft. Then something tapped against one of the metal trash cans near the access path behind me. 3 quick taps. Tap, tap, tap. I spun around. The trash cans stood in a row by the dune fence. Nothing near them. No person, no animal. The sand around them looked undisturbed. When I turned back to the ocean, the light was closer again. Now it hovered just beyond the first line of breaking waves. That was impossible. It had been far beyond the break. Now it sat maybe 40 yards offshore, low over the water. The smooth patch beneath it had come with it, sliding towards shore without making waves. My chest tightened so hard I had trouble breathing. I tried the radio one more time while backing away. Base, I need another unit to my location. Dead. I pressed the emergency button. Nothing. The little red indicator didn't even blink. The light brightened. The sand under my feet felt warm, not sun-warmed. The sun wasn't up yet. It was a damp beach before sunrise. The sand should have been cool. But a circle around me had warmed through my sandals like there was a heating coil buried under it. The smell of hot metal grew stronger. Then I saw footprints appear in the wet sand near the waterline. They weren't walking toward me. They formed one by one from the surf edge inland, as if someone invisible had already crossed there and the marks were only now deciding to show. Barefoot. Long. Too narrow. They stopped after 5 steps. I stood frozen, staring at them. A wave washed over them a second later. The prints stayed. The water ran around them, leaving the depressions sharp and dark. The radio finally made sound again. A single burst of static, then my own voice came through it. Not live. Recorded sounding. Base, Unit 3. That was what I'd said earlier for the radio check. Then it played again. Base, Unit 3. Exactly the same tone. I dropped the radio in the sand. The light over the water went out, not faded. Out. The ocean sounded normal for about half a second. Then every wave along our section broke at once. I don't mean a big wave came in. I mean every visible wave from the jetty to the south stand collapsed at the same moment with one flat crash, like someone dropped a sheet of water onto the shore. Foam rushed up the sand almost to my knees. I stumbled backward, soaked now, grabbing the rescue can strap across my shoulder. Then the wind returned, hard. It hit from the ocean side this time, throwing salt spray into my face. The flags near the shack snapped loudly. The dune grass hissed. Gulls started screaming somewhere overhead as if someone had unmuted the morning all at once. The radio buzzed in the sand. Dispatch came through. Unit 3, repeat your last. I grabbed it with shaking hands. I looked out at the water. No light. No smooth patch. Waves rolling normally under gray clouds. I pressed transmit. Disregard. I had interference. My voice sounded wrong, hoarse and dry. Dispatch paused, then said, "Copy." I checked the time on my phone. It was dead. The radio clock showed 5:56 a.m. That made no sense. I had walked down to the water not long after 5:12. The whole thing felt maybe 10 minutes long, 15 at most. Almost 40 minutes were gone. The rest of the crew started arriving soon after. Luis pulled into the lot first, then Dana, then 2 rookies I didn't know well yet. They were joking about coffee and weekend crowds until they saw me standing soaked near the waterline. Luis asked if I'd gone in. I said I slipped. He looked at the ocean, then at me, then didn't push it. The sun came up behind the clouds around 6:20, giving everything a flat silver look. I walked the shoreline again with Luis during the formal check. The weird footprints were gone by then. The tide had moved over that area enough to wipe everything smooth. But one thing remained. A perfectly round patch of sand near where I'd been standing was dry. Not just less wet, dry. About 8 feet across, set inside damp morning sand. The edges were too clean, and the sand inside had turned pale gray, almost powdery. Luis noticed it before I said anything. "What's that from?" I shrugged. He stepped into the circle and immediately stepped back out. "Warm," he said. I didn't answer. He crouched and touched the sand. When he rubbed his fingers together, fine white dust clung to them. It looked like crushed shell at first, but there were no shell pieces in that part of the beach. He smelled his hand and made a face. "Smells like batteries." We were still looking at it when my radio chirped loudly. Both of us jumped. Dispatch called again, asking if Unit 3 had an equipment problem. I said my radio was fine now. The woman on dispatch said they had received 3 failed transmissions from my unit between 5:23 and 5:51. No voice. Just open carrier in a low tone. Luis looked at me. I looked out at the water. The ocean beyond the break looked normal. By 8, swimmers started showing up. By 10, the beach was full enough that nothing felt real anymore. Kids screaming, umbrellas, coolers, radios, people asking about jellyfish. The dry patch got walked over and blended into the rest of the sand. I kept catching myself scanning beyond the break. Nothing came back. At noon, I went to the shack to charge my phone. It turned on immediately at 42%. There was one video in the camera roll that I didn't remember saving. It was only 6 seconds long. The frame showed the ocean before sunrise, mostly gray waves in the dark line of the horizon. The pale light was visible, but barely, just a soft blur above the water. The audio had no wind, no waves, nothing for the first 5 seconds. Then, right before the video ended, a voice very close to the microphone said, "Stay back." It sounded like me. I deleted it. After shift, I checked the rescue can because the strap had rubbed my shoulder raw all day. The bottom of it had 3 long scratches across the red plastic, deep enough to show white underneath. They weren't there that morning when I carried it down from the shack. Inside the hollow handle, packed where no sand should have gotten, was a line of damp gray powder. I tipped it out onto the concrete floor. It fell in a clean oval shape before the breeze through the open door scattered it. I lived about a mile from this old recreation park on the north side of Columbus. It wasn't abandoned or anything, just neglected. A few baseball fields, a playground, 2 basketball courts, and 4 tennis courts tucked behind a line of trees where the parking lot lights barely reached. I used to walk through it on my way home from the grocery warehouse, from a late shift at a grocery warehouse, Resign. It saved maybe 10 minutes compared to staying on the main road. And after a while, I stopped thinking about how empty it got at night. This happened in early June, after one of those hot days where the pavement still breathed heat hours after sunset. I got off work a little after 11. My car was in the shop, so I took the bus partway and walked the rest. The air was thick and damp, and storms were supposed to come in overnight, but at that point it was only cloudy. No rain yet, no breeze either. Just low clouds reflecting city light and making everything look dull orange-gray. I reached the park around 11:40. The main path cut between the baseball fields, past the restrooms, then behind the tennis courts before coming out near my apartment complex. Usually I could hear traffic from Morse Road the whole time. That night it sounded farther away than normal, like someone had turned the volume down on the city. At first, I blamed the humidity. The park itself looked normal. Empty swings moving slightly from weight they didn't have, a trash can tipped near the basketball court, one security light buzzing over the restroom building. The tennis court sat beyond that, surrounded by chain-link fence, with green windscreen strips torn loose in places. I almost didn't notice the light. I was looking down at my phone, trying to see if the bus app had charged me twice, when something bright caught my eye through the fence. There was a patch of white light on the far tennis court. Court 4. the one closest to the tree line. Not a circle exactly, more like an oval, maybe 10 feet across, sitting on the surface of the court near the baseline. My first thought was that a floodlight had come on, but the tennis court lights hadn't worked in years. The poles were still there, but half the fixtures were gone and the rest were rusted dark. The only working light anywhere nearby was the yellow security lamp by the restroom, and that barely reached court 1. This light was white, soft but bright. I stopped walking. The rest of the courts were dark. The patch of light sat there on the far court with no visible source above it. I looked up, expecting maybe a drone or helicopter or some kind of spotlight through the clouds. Nothing. The sky was solid overcast. No stars, no moon, no aircraft lights. The white patch stayed completely still. I stood on the path outside the fence and stared at it longer than I meant to. It didn't flicker, didn't sweep around, didn't change shape. It just rested on the court surface like somebody had cut a hole in the darkness. I laughed once under my breath, not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. Then the chain link fence beside me started humming. I had my left hand resting on it without thinking. The vibration came through my palm first, soft and steady, like an electric toothbrush running somewhere down the line. I pulled my hand away fast. The humming continued. Not loud, just enough that the loose pieces of green windscreen trembled faintly against the fence, even though there still wasn't any wind. I checked around for power lines. There were none close to the courts, just the old light poles inside and trees behind them. The bright patch on court 4 seemed to pulse once, very gently. The fence hum got stronger for about 2 seconds, then settled again. I should have kept walking. That was the sensible thing. It was an empty park near midnight, and something weird was happening behind a fence. There was nothing in my life that required me to investigate it. But I stood there anyway. The gate to the courts was about 20 feet ahead. It was supposed to be locked after dusk, but the latch had been broken since winter. Kids squeezed in there to smoke or mess around, and nobody from the city seemed to care. I walked toward it slowly. The closer I got, the quieter everything became. The traffic faded first, then the buzz from the restroom light, then even the normal summer sounds, crickets and whatever else lived in the grass, dropped away completely. By the time I reached the gate, all I could hear was the chain link humming and my own shoes on the cracked pavement. The gate stood slightly open. That bothered me because I had passed those courts almost every night for months, and I was pretty sure the gate usually hung shut, even if it didn't lock. I pushed it with 2 fingers. It opened with a long scrape. The humming traveled through the metal into my fingers again, then up my arm. It didn't feel like a shock, more like pressure, like the fence was full of bees I couldn't see. I stepped inside. The air changed immediately. Outside the fence, the night had been warm and damp. Inside, it felt cooler at first, then suddenly warmer near my face. Not enough to make me sweat, just strange, uneven, like pockets of air had different temperatures. The white patch on the far court remained where it was. Court 4, right near the back line. I walked across court 1, then court 2, following the center aisle between the nets. The nets sagged in the middle and had leaves caught in them. My footsteps sounded wrong against the court surface. Too flat, no echo from the fence around me. When I reached court 3, I noticed the smell, rain and hot metal. That was the only way to describe it, like a storm hitting a transformer or standing near train tracks after heavy weather. But the sky hadn't opened yet, and nothing around me should have been hot. The light on court 4 brightened slightly. I stopped. From where I stood, I could see there was nothing shining down onto it. No beam, no reflection from windows, no flashlight. The white oval just existed on the faded green court. The weirdest part was the court surface inside the light looked dry. Everywhere else had that faint, damp shine from humidity and earlier dew, but the patch itself looked dusty, almost chalky. Then something clicked behind me, not loud, like a tennis ball hitting the fence softly. I turned around. The courts behind me were empty. The gate stood open about the same amount. Beyond it, the park path looked much darker than it had seconds earlier. I couldn't see the restroom light anymore. I told myself maybe it was blocked by the fence angle. I turned back toward the light. It was closer. Not by much, maybe a few feet, but I was sure it had been near the baseline, and now it sat nearer to the service line. I hadn't seen it move. The fence hummed harder. One of the torn windscreen strips fluttered outward and held there, stiff as if wind blew from inside the courts only. But my shirt didn't move. Nothing touched my face. I took a step backward. The white patch stayed still. Then the court net nearest it began to sag lower. Slowly, like pressure was being put on it from above, though nothing touched it. The top cord dipped maybe 6 inches, then rose back. I said, "Hello?" My voice sounded small and dead. No echo, no carry. The light pulsed again. This time the center of it looked darker for a second, like something moved behind frosted glass. I couldn't make out a shape. It was just a shadow passing through the whiteness. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out so fast I almost dropped it. The screen showed no service. Battery at 7%. That made no sense because I'd charged it at work and had barely used it since. It had been at 60-something on the bus. The step counter was open for some reason. I didn't remember opening it. It said 8,421 steps. I remember that number clearly because I had checked earlier at work and it was around 7,900. So that seemed normal enough. Maybe I'd walked a few hundred since getting off the bus. Then the number changed. 8,422, 8,423, 8,424. I stared at it. I was standing still. The count kept climbing. 1 step every second at first, then faster. 8,430, 8,438, 8,449. I held the phone out away from my body like that would make it stop. The numbers kept rising. The fence hummed so loudly now that I could hear it through the air. Then something dragged across the far court, a slow scrape. I looked up. The white patch had stretched longer, pulled toward me across the surface like spilled milk sliding uphill. But the edges stayed too smooth. I backed away again. The step count kept going. 8,501, 8,519, 8,542. The phone warmed in my hand. Then the screen dimmed and went black. I pressed the button. Nothing. The light on the court brightened. And suddenly I noticed that the trees beyond the fence had gone completely still. Not just still because there was no wind. Still like a photograph, leaves frozen in place. Branches black against the gray-orange sky. No movement anywhere. A low sound started behind the court, not from the fence. From above or below, I couldn't tell. A hum deeper than the chain link vibration, like a large machine running underground. The white patch of light began to move again. This time I saw it. It slid slowly across court 4 toward the center aisle. No source above, no shadow underneath, just light moving over paint lines and cracks. My legs felt heavy. Not numb, exactly. Just slow. I turned toward the gate, but the distance seemed wrong. The gate looked farther away than it should have been, and the court lines between me and it seemed stretched. I started walking. The step counter in my dead phone couldn't be seen, but I could feel it somehow. I know that sounds stupid, but each step I took felt counted, marked, like the ground registered it before my foot landed. Behind me, the scraping stopped. Then there were footsteps, soft rubber footsteps on the court surface. Not mine. I froze. The other footsteps stopped at the exact same time. I turned my head slowly. Nothing stood behind me. The white patch was gone from court 4. Instead, a dim glow now hung above the net between court 3 and 4, maybe chest height, like a pale oval suspended in the air. It was no longer just on the ground. I remember my mouth going dry. The glow didn't illuminate the nets or posts properly. It touched the edges of things, but left the centers dark. The chain link fence behind it looked bent. Not physically bent, but visually warped around its outline. Then something tapped the fence to my right. 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. I jerked away. There was nothing there. But the fence in that section vibrated harder than the rest, and for half a second I saw long, narrow impressions in the green windscreen, like fingers pressing from the other side. They faded before I could focus on them. I ran. At least I tried to. My first few steps felt wrong, like running in shallow water. The court surface seemed soft under my shoes, not spongy, more like it gave way slightly and then pushed back. The humming grew louder. The glow stayed in the corner of my eye, never directly behind me, always a little off to the side. I reached the gate, grabbed the metal frame, and pulled myself through. The fence shocked warmth into my hand, not electricity but heat, and I stumbled onto the path outside. The second both feet hit the pavement, sound returned. Traffic. Crickets. The restroom light buzzing. A dog barking somewhere across the street. The gate swung shut behind me with a clean metal click. I spun around. The tennis courts were dark. No white patch. No floating glow. No movement. The gate was closed. I reached for it automatically and stopped. A chain wrapped through the latch now. Padlock hanging from it. Locked. I stared at that lock for maybe a full minute. The chain looked old and rusted, same as always, wrapped properly around the gate post. There was no way I had just come through it. No gap. No broken latch. I backed away from the fence, still breathing hard. My phone buzzed in my hand. It turned on by itself. Battery at 34%. The time said 12:28 a.m. I had entered the park around 11:40. The walkthrough usually took 10 minutes. Even standing there watching the light, it shouldn't have been almost an hour. Then I saw the step count, 9,317. I froze. That meant my phone had counted nearly 900 steps while I had been inside the courts. I had not walked that far. Not even close. I checked the health app with my thumb shaking. The step graph showed a burst of activity between 11:51 and 12:19. Not normal walking either. It looked like constant movement, steady and fast, as if I had paced laps for almost half an hour without stopping. I zoomed in. The phone said I had covered 0.42 miles, inside those tennis courts. While I remembered standing still, I looked back through the fence. The far court was dark, but there was something on the surface where the light had started. A pale oval patch, barely visible under the weak sky glow. I couldn't tell if it was powder, dust, or just discoloration. I wasn't going back in to check. I walked home the long way around the park, staying on the main road under streetlights. My legs felt sore by the time I reached my apartment, like I really had walked much farther than I remembered. At home, I took my shoes off and noticed white grit packed around the soles. Not dust from the warehouse. Not regular dirt. Fine powder, almost like chalk, stuck in the grooves of both shoes. It smelled faintly metallic when I scraped it out with a paper towel. My socks were damp too. Not sweaty damp. Cold wet, like I'd stepped through dew, though the court surface had looked dry. I threw the socks away. The next morning, I told myself I'd imagined most of it because I was tired. I almost believed that until I looked at my phone again. The step counts still showed the burst from the night before, but now there was a route map attached, a tiny blue line showing where those steps happened. It didn't show me inside the tennis courts. It showed me moving in tight circles in the empty field behind them, on the far side of the tree line. I had never gone behind the courts. There wasn't even a proper path there. After work that evening, I made myself walk past in daylight. The courts looked normal. Cracked surface, old nets, leaves collected in corners. The gate was locked with the same chain and padlock. Court 4 had a pale mark on it, an oval about 10 feet wide near the baseline. Not painted. Not stained. The surface there looked faded and dry, like it had been sanded down. Behind the courts, past the fence and the trees, the grass in the empty field was flattened in a wide circle. I stood outside the fence staring at it. The flattened grass wasn't trampled randomly. It leaned all in the same direction, around and around, like something had walked circles there for a long time without leaving footprints. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The health app had opened again. The step count started climbing. 1, 2, 3. I was standing still on the sidewalk. From the far court, behind the locked fence, the chain link began to hum. I found the quarry by accident, which is usually how places like that get found. It sat outside a small town in western Pennsylvania, maybe 15 minutes past the last gas station, down a county road that turned into broken pavement and then gravel. I wasn't looking for anything weird that day. I'd been taking back roads after work because there was a crash on the main highway and my GPS kept trying to reroute me through places I'd never been. This was in late August, after a hot day that ended with heavy clouds moving in before sunset. The air smelled like rain, but none had fallen yet. Everything looked green and dusty and tired, like summer had been sitting on it too long. I noticed the quarry entrance because of the sign. No trespassing. Private property. The gate was open behind it. Not wide open, just pushed inward enough that a car could probably squeeze through if the driver didn't care about scratching paint. I slowed down when I passed because beyond the gate I could see an old gravel road heading uphill between trees, and at the top of it there was a faded office trailer or small building with boarded up sides. I should have kept going. Instead, I parked on the shoulder a little way down the road and walked back. I used to explore abandoned places when I was younger. Nothing serious, mostly old farmhouses and closed schools. I'd stopped doing it much because trespassing tickets aren't fun, and old buildings are full of nails, but something about that quarry pulled at me. Maybe because it didn't look fully abandoned. More like everyone had left one afternoon and never came back. I climbed around the gate and walked up the gravel road. The quarry opened up slowly as I got higher. Trees blocked most of it from the road, but once I reached the top, the ground dropped away into a wide pit filled with black water. Rusted equipment sat along the edge, conveyor belts, a broken scale, a yellow loader with its tires half sunk into weeds. The office sat about 50 yards from the edge of the pit. It was a one-story cinder block building, not a trailer like I'd thought. Flat roof, small front porch, 4 windows facing the yard. A faded sign above the door said Ridgeway Aggregates in peeling blue letters. The whole place had that quiet, abandoned smell. Dust, old oil, damp leaves, hot metal cooling after a long day. I checked my phone. 7:34 p.m. Plenty of light left, I thought. The sky had gone cloudy and dull, but not dark yet. I walked around the yard slowly, taking pictures of the old loader and the pit. The water was perfectly still, no birds on it, no frogs, no insects buzzing near the reeds. That should have bothered me earlier than it did. At first, the only strange thing was the silence. Even in abandoned places, there's sound. Bugs, traffic somewhere, branches moving, a plane overhead. The quarry seemed padded. My shoes crunching on gravel sounded too close to my ears. I was near the old way station when I saw the office windows glowing. Faint white light. All 4 front windows had it. Not bright like a lamp was on. More like someone had filled the room with fog that glowed from the inside. I stopped walking. There was no power to that building. I had noticed the utility pole near the road earlier. The line running from it sagged down and ended in the weeds, cut or snapped years before. The meter box on the side of the office was open and empty. No glass. No meter. Still, the windows glowed. I stood there trying to explain it. Sunset reflection, maybe. The sky behind me reflecting on dusty glass. But the sky wasn't bright white. It was gray and heavy with storm clouds. And the glow didn't move when I moved. I walked a few steps sideways, still there, soft white behind each dirty window. The office door was closed. A rusted padlock hung from the hasp. The porch boards sagged but hadn't collapsed. I didn't go closer right away. I just watched. Then something passed across the glass. Not behind one window, across all 4. A darker shape moved from left to right, blocking the glow for maybe 2 seconds as if something inside walked between me and a light source. My whole body tightened. I knew there couldn't be anyone in there. Not because it was impossible. People break into abandoned buildings all the time. But something about the movement was too smooth, too steady. It didn't have the normal bob of a person walking. It slid. I called out, "Hello?" My voice barely carried. No answer. The glow stayed steady again. The air changed then. The rain smell became stronger, but mixed with something else. Hot metal, sharp and dry. I looked toward the pit water and noticed faint ripples moving outward from the far side. There was no wind. The water had been still when I arrived. The ripples came in even pulses, one after another, like something under the surface pushed upward on a schedule. I backed away from the way station and turned toward the road. That was when I realized the gate looked farther away than it should have. The gravel road down to it had stretched somehow. It curved between trees, which I didn't remember. I could still see the opening at the bottom, but it looked dim and narrow, like I was looking through the wrong end of binoculars. I told myself I was spooked and perspective was weird in a quarry. Then metal clicked behind me. One sharp tick from the loader, then another from the conveyor frame, then another from the office roof. Tick, tick, tick. The sounds came from different spots around the yard, soft and spaced apart like machinery cooling after use. But nothing had run there in years. The office glow brightened slightly. I looked back. The windows were clearer now. Not clean, exactly, but bright enough that I could see shapes inside. A counter, a filing cabinet, a chair lying on its side. Then the darker shape crossed again, this time slower. It stopped in front of the second window. Just a vertical darkness inside the glow. No face, no features, just a figure-shaped absence. I froze. It remained there long enough for my eyes to start trying to fill in details. Tall. Too tall for the room, maybe. Or maybe the light distorted it. Then it moved away from the glass and the window returned to white. My phone buzzed in my hand so suddenly I almost dropped it. The screen showed no service. Battery at 6%. It had been over half when I left work. I tried the camera. The screen lagged badly, smearing the office building when I moved it. When I aimed at the glowing windows, the image darkened until the building became almost black. I lowered the phone. In real life, the glow was still there. The ticking grew faster. All around the yard now. The office walls, the loader bucket, the metal scale platform, even the chain on the gate somewhere far behind me, faint but clear. I stepped toward the office because panic makes people stupid sometimes. Part of me needed to prove the glow was explainable before I ran back down the road. The gravel near the office looked damp. That made no sense. The rest of the yard was dry and dusty. But around the front porch, the ground had dark patches like rain had fallen only there. I stopped at the bottom step. The office windows hummed softly. Not the glass itself, maybe, but the air around them. A low vibration that made my teeth feel strange. I reached out and touched the porch railing. Warm. It should have been cool by then. The sun was gone behind clouds and the wood sat in shade, but the railing felt like it had been under a heat lamp. The glow behind the windows shifted. Not from side to side this time. Inward. Like the whole room inside the office pulled farther away. I know how that sounds. But I was staring through glass at a small cinder block office, and suddenly the glowing space behind it looked deeper than the building could physically be. The chair on the floor seemed far back now. The filing cabinet even farther. The back wall disappeared into pale haze. Then came 3 taps from inside the door. Tap, tap, tap. I stepped backward off the porch and nearly fell. The padlock still hung locked on the door. Another tap came from the window nearest me, not from inside exactly, from the glass itself. A pale oval mark formed on the dusty surface about the size of a palm. Moisture appeared around it, fogging outward. I didn't wait anymore. I turned and walked fast toward the gate. The ticking stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt worse. The quarry road ahead looked wrong again, longer, more shadowed. Trees leaned inward over it, though I didn't remember that many trees along the road at all. Behind me, the office door creaked. I did look back then. The door was still shut, padlock still there, but all 4 windows were dark, no glow, nothing. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I saw a pale light near the quarry water, low over the pit, not in the office anymore. It hovered just above the black surface on the far side, soft white and oval shaped, maybe the size of a car from where I stood. It didn't reflect right. The water under it showed only a dull smear, not a proper reflection. The ripples continued spreading outward from beneath it. Steady pulses. 1, 2, 3. I started running. The gravel road crunched under my shoes, but the sound became muffled after a few steps. My breath sounded muffled too. The trees along the road seemed to repeat. Same broken branch. Same muddy tire rut. Same piece of blue plastic caught in weeds. I checked over my shoulder once. The pale light had moved away from the water. It drifted between the quarry equipment now and lay low and silent, passing behind the rusted conveyor frame without lighting it properly. Then I tripped. My foot caught on something in the road and I went down hard on both hands. Gravel cut into my palms. My phone skidded away and landed face up near a clump of grass. The screen lit up. 8:19 p.m. That couldn't be right. I had checked it at 7:34 not long before. I'd been there maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20, not 45. The phone screen flickered. For 1 second, it showed the camera view even though I hadn't reopened it. The image faced behind me toward the office. The windows glowed bright white again. And in the nearest one, something stood close to the glass. Too close. Then the phone went black. I grabbed it and scrambled up. The gate was visible ahead now, maybe 30 yards away. I ran for it without looking back again. The air smelled strongly metallic as I reached the entrance. The gate that had been open enough for me to squeeze through was shut. Chain wrapped around it, padlock locked. I stopped so fast I almost slammed into it. My hands shook as I grabbed the bars. The metal gate hummed softly under my palms. The chain was secure. The lock looked old and rusted. No way through except climbing. I threw one leg over the gate and climbed badly, scraping my shin on the top rail. Halfway over, the hum pulsed hard through the metal, and for a second my hands wouldn't let go. Not stuck exactly, more like my muscles forgot what to do. Behind me, the quarry office made one loud metallic knock. The hum stopped. I dropped down on the roadside of the gate and landed on my knees in gravel. Normal sound rushed back immediately. Crickets, a car passing somewhere distant, wind moving through trees. The whole world felt suddenly too loud. I staggered to my car and locked myself inside. My phone turned on in my hand, battery 41%. Time 8:21. No missed calls, no weird notifications, just normal. I sat there until my breathing slowed enough to drive. Before starting the car, I looked through the windshield at the quarry entrance. The gate was still closed and chained. Beyond it, the office sat dark at the top of the road. No glow, no light over the pit. I drove home without music. The next morning, I found fine gray dust on the passenger seat, not from my shoes, not from the gravel cuts on my hands. It sat in a neat oval patch on the fabric, as if something dusty and damp had rested there. Mixed into it were tiny, translucent flakes. I touched one and it crumbled instantly into powder that smelled like rain and hot metal. I went back 2 days later in daylight because I couldn't stop thinking about the gate. The entrance was locked. The chain looked like it hadn't moved in years. Weeds had grown through parts of it. A rusted sign had been wired across the middle. No fresh tire marks. No footprints except mine from the shoulder. I stood there looking up at the quarry office through the trees. One of the front windows was cracked, not shattered, cracked in a perfect oval shape from the inside out, and on the dusty glass around it, faint but visible even from the road, were 3 long marks where something had dragged downward across the pane before the glow went out. I was a rural carrier in southern Indiana when this happened, outside a town small enough that everybody knew which truck belonged to which family. My route ran through farmland, patches of woods, a few old churches, and long roads with mailboxes set so far apart you could drive a whole minute between them. This was in early October, one of those mornings where fog sat low in the fields, but the sky above it was clear. Not heavy fog on the road, just a white layer over the soybeans and ditches, with fence posts sticking out of it here and there. I started early because we were short 2 carriers that week. The sun wasn't fully up yet when I loaded the LLV behind the post office. The parking lot lights still buzzed overhead, and the air smelled like wet leaves and diesel from the trucks warming up. My supervisor, Angie, was inside arguing with the scanner system, so I signed for my keys, sorted the last tray myself, and pulled out around 6:25. The first part of the route was normal. A few subdivisions, one dog that always barked behind a glass door, a guy named Mr. Kessler standing in his bathrobe by the mailbox like he did every morning waiting for a newspaper that hadn't come that early in 10 years. By 7:10, I was out on County Road 18, where the houses spread out and the route got quiet. The road dipped between fields and followed an old drainage ditch toward a line of woods. I liked that part most days because there wasn't much traffic and the boxes were all on the right side if you were driving east. That morning, all the mailbox flags were up. Not just 1 or 2. Every single flag along that stretch of road stood raised. Red flags, faded orange flags, cracked plastic flags, one metal flag bent at the corner, all up. At first I thought it was a prank. Kids did dumb stuff before school sometimes. They'd switch house numbers, move pumpkins into the road, put rubber snakes in mailboxes. Raising flags wasn't much of anything, but seeing all of them up at once felt strange. The reason it bothered me was because I knew I had lowered those flags the day before. That's just muscle memory. You deliver outgoing, you lower the flag. Most people on that road didn't get outgoing every day, but on the previous afternoon I had picked up a stack of utility bills from the first 3 houses and lowered each flag. Now they were all up again. I stopped at the first box, the carver's place, and opened it. Empty. No outgoing mail. I lowered the flag and put their envelopes in. The next box was up too. Empty. I lowered it. Same with the next. By the 4th mailbox, I started feeling annoyed. By the 6th, I wasn't annoyed anymore. I was looking down the road at each raised flag poking through the fog, one after another like a line of little red hands. No cars passed. No farm equipment. Nothing. The road was quiet, except for the LLV's rattling fan and the soft slap of mail against the tray beside me. I got to the long field owned by the Blevins family, where the road curved around a pond and then climbed slightly. The fog was thicker there, sitting across the soybean rows in a smooth sheet. The sun had started coming up behind me, turning the tops of the trees pale yellow. That was where I saw the bright shape over the field. It hung low above the soybeans, maybe 30 or 40 feet off the ground beyond the fence line. Not in the sky exactly, over the field, bright white but soft around the edges. It was shaped like an oval standing on end, slightly wider at the middle. Not huge. Maybe the size of a grain silo door from where I sat, though it was hard to judge distance in the fog. I took my foot off the gas. The LLV rolled forward a few feet and stopped with a squeak from the brakes. At first, I thought it was a reflection from the rising sun on something metal. A piece of farm equipment maybe, a greenhouse panel, a parked truck hidden by fog. But it was hanging above the crop, not sitting in it. It didn't move. No noise came from it. The morning was so still that I could hear the truck idling badly under me. One of those old mail trucks always sounded like it might die at any second. But that morning, the engine noise faded in a weird way, like I had rolled the windows up even though the side window was already open. I looked at the road ahead. The next mailbox flag was up. So was the one after it. So was the one at the Blevins driveway. All of them raised. I picked up the scanner from the seat beside me and checked the time. 7:18. Then the scanner screen blinked. The route map disappeared and came back upside down. I stared at it. The GPS arrow spun once, slow and smooth, then froze. I tapped the screen. Nothing. The bright shape over the field pulsed once. Not bright enough to make me squint, but enough that the fog around it flashed pale and the soybean leaves underneath appeared for one clean second. Every leaf in that patch was turned upward, like they were all reaching toward it. Then the scanner made a sound I'd never heard before, a single low tone, not an alert, more like a dial tone that had been stretched out. I set it down. The radio in the LLV crackled, which shouldn't have happened because it didn't have a working radio. Not for music, not for dispatch, nothing. The old unit had been ripped out years earlier, leaving only the empty slot and wires capped behind the dash. Still, something crackled behind the dashboard. Static. Then a voice, low and broken. I couldn't make out words. It lasted maybe 3 seconds and stopped. The engine stalled. The whole truck went quiet. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, looking through the windshield at that white shape in the field. The fog around it didn't drift. That was the part that finally made the hair on my arms rise. The fog elsewhere moved slowly across the ditch. Pushed by a morning breeze, I couldn't feel much inside the truck. But around the light, it held perfectly still in a smooth oval pocket. I tried the ignition. The truck clicked once. Nothing. I tried again. Nothing. The bright shape drifted sideways. Just a few feet. No sound, no bobbing, no sign of wind. It moved through the fog the way a reflection moves across water. Then something tapped against the back of the truck. 3 soft taps. Tap, tap, tap. I turned so fast my shoulder hit the seat frame. The back cargo area was full of trays and packages, nothing else. The rear door was closed. The partition behind my seat had that scratched metal panel, and beyond it I could see parcels stacked on the shelves. No person, no animal. Then the taps came again, this time from the passenger side window. Tap, tap, tap. I looked slowly. There was nothing outside but fog and ditch grass. The window glass had started to fog over from the outside, though the morning air wasn't cold enough for that. A white patch bloomed on the glass near the latch, then spread outward in thin lines. I wiped the inside with my sleeve, uselessly. The fog was outside. As it spread, 3 narrow clear marks appeared through it, dragging downward like fingers through condensation. I threw the truck into neutral out of habit, even though the engine was dead. I don't know what I thought that would do. The mailbox beside me creaked. I looked out the windshield. The flag on the Blevins mailbox moved. Slowly. It lowered halfway by itself, then rose back up. No wind touched it. The metal box clicked softly as the flag settled in the upright position. The bright shape over the field pulsed again. A smell came through the open window then, wet earth and hot metal, like rain hitting a transformer. There had been no rain that morning, only fog. The road was damp, but not wet enough to smell like that. I reached for my phone. No service. Battery at 2%. That was impossible. I had charged it in the case at the office. I barely used it during the route. I tried calling Angie anyway. The call failed before it even rang. The phone shut off. The LLV's hazard lights came on by themselves. One blink, then off. Then one blink again. The white shape in the field seemed closer after each flash. I didn't see it cross the fence line, but suddenly it was nearer to the road. The soybeans underneath it bent outward in a flat circle, not broken, just pressed away from the center. I could see now that the light wasn't round exactly. The edges looked soft, but the center had a darker vertical streak inside it, like something solid stood in front of a bright surface. I opened the driver's door. The second my boot touched the road, the engine started behind me. I jumped so hard I knocked my elbow against the door. The truck idled normally. The scanner screen came back on and showed the route again. 7:19 team. Only 1 minute had passed, but the sun looked higher. The fog had thinned around the fields. I stood halfway out of the truck, one hand on the door, staring at the bright shape. It dimmed. Then it moved backward over the field without turning. It slid away through the fog, growing duller until it became a pale spot, then nothing. The breeze returned all at once. Fog stirred across the road, the engine rattle sounded loud again. A crow called from somewhere near the woods. Farther down the road, a pickup came over the rise and passed me slowly, the driver lifting 2 fingers from the wheel. I got back in and shut the door. For a minute, I just sat there breathing. Then I noticed the mailbox flags. Every flag I had already lowered was up again. All 6 behind me. I could see them through the side mirror, standing straight in a row. I don't know why that scared me worse than the light. Maybe because it was small and stupid and real. A light in the fog could be explained badly. Mailbox flags resetting behind me felt personal. I lowered the Blevins flag and delivered their mail. I kept driving. The rest of County Road 18 was wrong in little ways. At the Miller place, their black lab didn't bark. That dog always threw itself against the fence when I stopped, but it sat on the porch that morning with its head low, watching the field across the road. At the old church, the bell rope outside the side door swung gently back and forth, even though there was no wind in the yard. At the Haskins farm, the mailbox door was hanging open, and inside, all their mail from the day before sat neatly stacked, even though I knew I had delivered it. I kept going because I didn't know what else to do. My hands moved through the route automatically. Open box, deliver, lower flag, next box, next driveway, next bundle. Then, near the end of the road, I reached the 3 houses by the creek, the Romer house, the little rental with blue shutters, the yellow farmhouse where Mrs. Delaney lived. I remember approaching the first one. I remember the flag being up. Then I remember being past all 3 houses, driving near the bridge. Just like that. No stopping. No mail delivered. No memory of passing them. The tray beside me still had their mail in it. 3 bundles, rubber banded separately, sitting on top like I had pulled them out and never put them in the boxes. I hit the brakes. The truck skidded slightly on damp gravel near the shoulder. I looked in the mirror. The 3 houses were behind me, maybe a quarter mile back. All 3 mailbox flags stood raised. I sat there with my stomach turning. I had skipped houses before by accident. Every carrier does once in a while, but I didn't skip them like that. Not with bundles already sorted, not with no memory at all. I checked the scanner. It showed I had stopped at each address. 3 green delivery confirmations. Timestamps all at 7:27. Same minute. That was impossible. Those boxes were too far apart. Even driving fast, I couldn't have serviced all 3 in 1 minute. I reversed slowly along the shoulder until I could turn around near the bridge. When I got back to the Romer box, I stopped. The mailbox door was closed. The flag was up. Inside was empty. I opened the tray beside me. Their bundle was gone. So was the rentals. So was Mrs. Delaney's. I checked the floor, the shelves, under parcels. Nothing. The mail had been delivered. I had no memory of doing it. I lowered the Romer flag with 2 fingers. The metal felt warm, not sun-warm. The sun had barely reached that side of the road. I drove to the next house. Same thing. Flag up. Mailbox empty. Flag warm. At Mrs. Delaney's, I saw something in the ditch behind her mailbox. A patch of fog. Not normal fog, drifting low. This was a small oval pocket hovering maybe a foot above the wet grass, bright around the edges like it was lit from inside. I blinked, and it collapsed flat across the ditch water, leaving only ripples spreading outward. Steady pulses, one after another. I did not get out of the truck. I lowered her flag and drove. The rest of the route went without anything obvious happening, but I felt watched the whole time. Every reflective mailbox door flashed white as I approached. Every puddle in a driveway seemed to hold a pale oval shape for half a second before the tires passed. By 10:30, I was back at the office. Angie asked why I was late on scans for the first rural section. I told her the scanner glitched. She rolled her eyes and said everything glitched. I wanted to tell her the rest, but she was already on the phone with another carrier, and I didn't know how to say any of it without sounding like I needed to be sent home. When I unloaded the empty trays, I found something in the back of the LLV. Not hidden, just sitting on the floor near the rear door. A mailbox flag. Red plastic, scratched and faded, not broken off. The hinge piece was intact, screws still stuck through it like it had been removed from a mailbox cleanly. I picked it up. It was wet with condensation, though the inside of the truck was dry. On the side, written in permanent marker, was Delaney. I drove back after my shift in my own car. I told myself maybe her flag had been loose and fallen into the truck somehow. It made no sense, but I needed something normal to check. Mrs. Delaney's mailbox had its flag attached, the same red plastic flag, same faded color, same little crack at the top corner. I had the other one on my passenger seat. I parked at the edge of the road and stared at both of them. The field across from her house was quiet in the late afternoon. Soybeans moving in a light breeze, birds on the fence, nothing white or glowing. Then Mrs. Delaney came out to get her mail. She waved at me like nothing was strange. I almost drove away, but instead I got out and asked if everything was okay with her box that morning. She said, "Was that you stopped out there so long?" I asked what she meant. She pointed toward the field across the road. "You were parked there with your flashers on. I thought you were having engine trouble." I asked how long. She shrugged. 20 minutes, maybe. I told her I didn't remember that. She looked at me carefully then. Then she said, "Well, there was that light too." I didn't say anything. She glanced at the field, figured it was a utility crew, but there wasn't any truck. I drove home with the extra mailbox flag still on my passenger seat. That night, I set it on my kitchen table. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a soft clicking sound. I walked into the kitchen and found the flag standing upright on its hinge by itself. No box, no screws holding it, just balanced there, raised. The window over the sink had fogged from the outside in one smooth oval patch, and beyond the glass, reflected faintly in the dark, was a pale white shape hanging low over the neighbor's yard. I parked on the top floor because the lower levels were full. This was in downtown Providence in one of those concrete garages attached to an office building and a hotel by a glass walkway. I had gone in for a late appointment with my accountant because my work schedule was all over the place, and by the time I left, it was almost 9:30 at night. It had rained earlier, not a storm exactly, just steady cold rain that made the streets shine and left puddles in every low spot of the garage. The top level was open to the sky, with waist-high concrete walls around the edges and a few tall light poles that buzzed and flickered in the damp air. I remember being irritated before anything strange happened. The parking app had charged me twice. The machine by the elevator had a cracked screen. My jacket was wet across the shoulders. I just wanted to get in my car and go home. The top floor was mostly empty, maybe 9 cars total, spread out in the rows. Mine was a gray Mazda parked near the far corner, 2 spaces from the concrete wall that looked out over the rooftops. From up there I could see wet streets, red traffic lights, a diner sign, and the dark top of the river beyond the buildings. The city sounded muffled from that height. Horns, tires on wet pavement, a siren somewhere far away. Normal night sounds. I was halfway across the deck when I noticed the windshields. Not mine at first. A black SUV 2 rows over had a white glow stretched across its windshield, then a pickup beside it, then a little blue hatchback near the stairwell. The reflection looked the same on all of them, a soft pale oval laid across the glass, like a bright sign overhead. I looked up right away. Nothing. The sky was low and cloudy, orange from city light. The garage lamps were yellow, not white. There was no helicopter, no drone, no spotlight sweeping across the roof. No lit billboard high enough to reflect down like that. The glow stayed on the windshields anyway. I stopped walking. At first, I thought maybe it was coming from one of the hotel windows across the street. Some big screen or conference room light bouncing weird off the wet cars. I turned in a slow circle, checking the surrounding buildings. Most windows were dark. A few offices had lights on, but they were small rectangles, warm-colored, normal. Nothing bright enough or shaped right. The glow on the cars didn't move when I moved. That was the first part that made my stomach tighten. Reflections usually shift when you walk past them. These didn't. The same pale oval sat across every windshield in that section of the garage, tilted at the same angle, bright in the same place, like all the cars were looking at one thing above them. I stood still and looked at my own car. Its windshield had the glow too, a wide white smear near the top, fading toward the hood. The rest of the top floor was dark and wet and quiet. Then one of the garage lights above me went out. Not flickered. Out. A second later, another light at the far corner dimmed until it was barely orange. The remaining lamps kept buzzing, but the whole level felt lower and flatter, like the air had thickened. I heard water dripping somewhere. Then I realized the city sounds had faded. No tires, no horns, no siren. Even the low hum from the building ventilation seemed to pull back. I walked toward my car faster. My key fob was in my hand. I pressed unlock while I was still 20 feet away. Nothing happened. No chirp, no flash. I pressed again. Nothing. I looked down at the fob like that was the problem, even though it had worked an hour earlier. The little red light on it didn't blink. I kept walking. The concrete under my shoes made damp squeaks. My car sat 2 spaces from the wall, exactly where I had left it, but it looked wrong because of that white reflection across the windshield. When I got close, I saw the glow wasn't just on the windshield. It stretched across the hood too, very faint, like something pale above me was being reflected in the rainwater beating on the paint. I looked up again. Still nothing. Only clouds. No object. No source. Just open wet air above the garage. The concrete wall behind my car had no light on it. That bothered me more than the windshield reflection. If something overhead was bright enough to show on the glass, it should have lit the wall, the ground, me. But the deck around the car stayed dim. I pressed the fob right beside the driver's door. Nothing. I pulled the manual key out and unlocked it that way. The lock turned, but before I opened the door, the windshield wipers twitched. Just once, they moved an inch up the glass and stopped. I jumped back. The car was off. No key in the ignition. Nobody inside. The wipers moved again, another inch, then stopped. The white glow across the windshield brightened slightly. I stared through the glass into the front seats, empty. My coffee cup in the holder. A grocery receipt on the passenger floor. Nothing else. The air smelled sharp suddenly. Rainwater and hot metal. Not engine heat. My car had been parked for more than an hour. This was more like the smell of a wet electrical box or an elevator motor burning. I reached for the door handle. The handle felt warm. Not hot enough to burn me, but warm enough that it didn't make sense in the cold, wet air. Before I pulled it, something tapped the roof of the car. 3 light taps. Tap, tap, tap. I looked up so fast my neck hurt. Nothing above the car. The wet roof reflected the same pale oval as the windshield. No birds, no person on the wall, no pipes overhead because it was the open top level. The taps came again, this time from inside the passenger window. Tap, tap, tap. I stepped backward between the parking spaces. The window fogged from the outside in a smooth patch near where the taps sounded. Condensation spread over the glass even though the rest of the car was just wet from rain. It formed a white oval, then slowly cleared in 3 thin downward lines, like something on the other side had dragged narrow fingers through it. I wanted to leave, not drive. Just leave the car and take the elevator down, find security, find anyone. I turned toward the elevator lobby. It was maybe 50 yards away, a small concrete box with glass doors and a yellow light inside. But it looked farther now. The rows of parking spaces between me, Kobe, and it seemed stretched out, repeating under the dim lamps. The same black SUV appeared twice. I knew that was impossible, but I saw one near the elevator and one 2 rows over, both with a cracked rear taillight, both with the same white oval across the windshield. My key fob clicked in my hand, not a normal chirp. A tiny mechanical click, like something inside it shifted. Then every car on the top floor clicked at once. Locks. All around me. Click, 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 click. Lights did not flash, alarms did not sound. Just the locks moving together in one dry wave across the deck. I froze in the lane, holding my useless fob. The glow across the windshields changed. It slid slowly from left to right over the glass surfaces, like whatever reflected in them had moved above the garage. I looked up again. Nothing. The clouds stayed flat and orange-gray. But as I stared, a darker shape passed through the cloud cover directly overhead. Not a plane. No blinking lights. No sound. Just a dim area, almost invisible, moving across the low clouds where the orange city glow should have been even. It crossed the space above the garage and stopped. The reflections on the windshield stopped too. I couldn't see the thing